Walking into that baby shower, I didn't expect a warm welcome. I'd grown accustomed to being treated like a shadow in my own marriage, an afterthought to my wife's social ambitions. But this was a new low. As soon as I stepped into the grand restaurant hall, the opulence nearly blinded me. Crystal chandeliers casting golden light, pastel floral arrangements lining every surface, and a crowd dressed to impress in designer clothes. I paused for a moment, taking it all in. This wasn't a celebration. It was a statement, one that had little to do with our unborn child and everything to do with my wife's relentless need to climb the social ladder. The hostess, perched behind her podium, barely acknowledged me as I approached. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone a shade too polite, as if she didn't believe I belonged here. I handed her the invitation, embossed with gold lettering, naturally, and she scanned it without looking up. Her eyebrows twitched ever so slightly, a flicker of judgment she probably thought I wouldn't notice. "Ah, the Wilson baby shower," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the packed room. "It's already started. Enjoy. Enjoy." That word didn't sit right with me, but I walked in anyway. The room was buzzing with chatter and laughter, champagne glasses clinking as impeccably dressed guests toasted to what, exactly? To Melanie's curated perfection? To the facade of a happy marriage? As I made my way through the crowd, I noticed the seating arrangements, elegantly calligraphed name cards marking each place at the round tables. I scanned the names. Melanie's friends, her colleagues, even her yoga instructor had seats. My name? Nowhere. I stood there, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes that flicked my way before darting back to their conversations. The whispers weren't subtle. "Is that her husband? I thought he was just a small-time chef or something. Does he even have a real job? I heard he manages a pub." A pub. The lie my wife had let fester for years, reducing my work to something small and unimportant, because the truth didn't fit her narrative. Finally, Melanie noticed me. She was radiant in her custom-made maternity dress, her smile wide as she basked in the attention of her guests. "Oh, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I didn't think you'd come." Before I could respond, she added, "It's just, we had more guests than expected, and, well," she gestured vaguely at the tables, "there's no seat for you." The words hit me harder than I'd expected, but I kept my expression neutral. "No seat?" I asked, my voice calm. I already knew the answer. Her smile didn't waver. "Why don't you try that pub across the street?" she suggested, her tone light and dismissive, as if she were doing me a favor. "It suits you perfectly." The laughter came next, rippling through the circle of her friends who had gathered around us. "Yes, the pub," one of them said, barely able to contain her giggles. "It's more your style, isn't it?" I stood there, absorbing their mockery, their sheer lack of respect. My gaze swept over the room, taking in the smirks, the raised eyebrows, the barely concealed glee. It would have been easy to lash out, to let anger take over, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that seemed to confuse Melanie and her entourage. "I'll do that," I said, my tone even. "Enjoy your party." And with that, I turned and walked away. My footsteps were steady, my shoulders square. I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes on me as I crossed the room and exited through the grand doors. The humiliation they had intended to inflict didn't stick. It slid off me like water off a well-oiled pan. Outside, the crisp evening air greeted me as I crossed the street toward the pub they'd mocked so readily. I could imagine their smug satisfaction, the way they'd laugh about this moment later. What they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that their assumptions about me, about my work, my worth, were about to crumble. They thought they'd reduced me to nothing. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't walking into a pub to drown my embarrassment. I was walking into my kingdom, a place I had built with my own hands, a testament to my skill and vision. And by the time they figured that out, their laughter would have turned to silence. The air outside the restaurant was cool, crisp enough to feel like a slap across my face, though not nearly as harsh as the sting of their words. The faint hum of traffic and the distant chatter of passers-by filled the evening, but all I could hear in my mind were Melanie's mocking words. It suits you perfectly. A dirty pub. That's what they thought of me and my life's work. It was laughable, really. If only they knew. I took my time crossing the street, each step measured and deliberate. The pub, or rather, what they thought was a pub, stood just a few paces away, its facade humble but impeccably maintained. A weathered sign hung above the entrance, the letters understated but elegant, the hidden gem. It was by design, of course. The name, the aesthetic, it all served a purpose. People who judged a book by its cover would dismiss it as another ordinary hole in the wall. And that was fine with me. It kept out the people who valued flash over substance, who wouldn't appreciate the artistry behind what we created here. Only those who truly sought something special ever walked through those doors. I reached the entrance, pausing for a moment. Behind me, I could feel the weight of their stares from across the street. Melanie and her friends, no doubt still snickering over my supposed humiliation. Their laughter wouldn't last long. I pushed open the door, and as soon as I stepped inside, everything changed. "Chef!" The maitre d' greeted me, his voice tinged with a mix of relief and respect. The room fell into a quiet hush as the staff turned to look at me. There was no mistaking it. I was home. The interior was the opposite of what Melanie's crowd would have expected. Subtle, refined, and intentionally intimate. It was a space designed for those who valued quality over pomp. The tables were set with precision, crystal glasses sparkling under the soft glow of chandeliers. The aroma of fresh herbs, aged wine, and seared perfection wafted through the air. It was intoxicating, even for me, and I lived in it every day. I nodded at the maitre d' as I shrugged off my jacket, handing it to a waiting staff member. "How are we looking tonight?" I asked casually, already scanning the dining room. "Fully booked, chef," he replied, his tone almost apologetic. "We've got a few VIPs at table 5 and an inspector at table 3. Everything's running smoothly." "Good," I said, my voice calm but authoritative. "Let's keep it that way." As I made my way toward the kitchen, the staff parted like the Red Sea, their eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. These were my people, my team, the ones who had stood by me through years of relentless hard work. They didn't see me as an afterthought or a joke. To them, I was the driving force behind everything we'd achieved. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. Chefs moved with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized like dancers in a ballet. The hiss of pans, the rhythmic chop of knives, the occasional shout of a sous chef, it was music to my ears. And at the center of it all was me. "Chef on the line," someone called as I stepped up to the pass. I didn't need to announce myself. My presence was enough to shift the energy in the room. I spent a few minutes checking the night specials, tasting sauces, and offering quiet corrections where needed. Every detail mattered here, from the angle of a garnish to the exact sear on a piece of fish. Excellence wasn't just a goal. It was the standard. Satisfied that everything was running smoothly, I leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the warmth of the kitchen surround me. It was moments like this that reminded me why I'd chosen this path. The sweat, the late nights, the endless hours. It had all been worth it. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement by the window. Across the street, silhouetted against the restaurant's warm glow, I saw Melanie and her friends. Their expressions had shifted from smug amusement to something closer to disbelief. I could almost hear their thoughts. What is he doing in there? For a brief moment, I considered walking back across the street, standing in front of them, and spelling it all out. I could have told them about the Michelin stars, the months-long reservation waitlist, the glowing reviews in every major food magazine. I could have explained that the hidden gem wasn't just a restaurant, it was a legacy. But where was the fun in that? Let them wonder. Let them put the pieces together on their own. I'd spent years letting them believe what they wanted to believe about me. Tonight, they could taste the consequences of their assumptions. I straightened up, smoothing the front of my chef's jacket, the embroidered "chef" on the pocket catching the light. With a quiet confidence, I turned my back on the window and walked deeper into my kitchen. My work was waiting, and I had a full house to impress. If Melanie and her friends wanted to learn the truth, they'd have to do it the hard way. Back in the kitchen, The night hummed along like a well-rehearsed symphony. Every plate leaving the pass was a work of art, every dish a testament to the meticulous care we poured into this place. I monitored each order with the precision of a conductor, tasting, correcting, and encouraging. The glow of pride in my staff's faces reminded me of what we had built together. I didn't need to look out the window again to know Melanie and her entourage were still there. Their curiosity was palpable, even from this distance. They probably thought I was wallowing in some dingy corner of the pub they had mocked, drowning my sorrows. They had no idea the doors they were staring at led to one of the most exclusive dining experiences in the city. And they certainly didn't know who was running the show. When the maitre d' approached me with an update, his voice carried a subtle note of amusement. "Chef, it seems we have some unexpected guests loitering outside. They've been peering in for a while now." I smirked, not surprised in the slightest. "Let them look," I said. "They'll figure it out soon enough." And figure it out they did. The first domino fell when a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the back door, revealing one of Boston's most prominent art collectors. She entered the restaurant with an air of practiced elegance, greeted warmly by my staff as a regular. Moments later, another high-profile guest arrived, a Harvard professor who had been a loyal patron for years. Each new arrival chipped away at Melanie's carefully constructed assumptions. The whispers started soon after. I could imagine the conversations happening across the street as Melanie and her friends began connecting the dots. Why are all these important people going into a pub? Why does the staff look so professional? And why does everyone seem to know him? Inside, the atmosphere remained calm and poised. My staff operated like clockwork, delivering the kind of flawless service that earned us our reputation. Meanwhile, I moved between stations, lending a hand where needed, my mind half focused on the night's work and half amused by the unraveling happening just outside those doors. The pivotal moment came when I stepped into the dining room to greet a VIP guest. As I approached the table, the Harvard professor rose to shake my hand. "Chef," he said warmly, "another masterpiece tonight. You've outdone yourself again." I thanked him, exchanging a few pleasantries before moving to the next table. The art collector, a woman known for her discerning taste, complimented the seasonal menu and mentioned how she had been looking forward to this reservation for months. These interactions were routine for me, but tonight, they carried an extra layer of satisfaction. I could feel their eyes on me, Melanie's and her friends, as I moved through the dining room. From where they stood outside, they had a clear view of the way the guests greeted me, the way the staff deferred to me, the way I carried myself with quiet authority. It was undeniable now. I wasn't just another face in the crowd. I was the face behind the hidden gem. As I returned to the kitchen, the maitre d' stopped me, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Chef, I think they're starting to understand." "Good," I said simply, slipping back into the rhythm of the night. I didn't need to gloat or confront them directly. The truth was doing all the work for me. By the time dessert was served, Melanie and her friends were gone. I imagined their walk back to the baby shower, the heavy silence hanging between them as they tried to process what they had just seen. They had come to mock me, to revel in what they assumed was my humiliation, and instead, they had stumbled upon a reality far beyond their comprehension. That night, as the last table cleared and the kitchen wound down, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. My life didn't fit neatly into the box Melanie had tried to shove me into, and it never would. I had built something extraordinary, something that spoke for itself. I didn't need their approval or validation. Their pale faces, their stunned silence, that was enough. And the best part? This was just the beginning. They hadn't even scratched the surface of what the hidden gem truly represented. But soon they would. And I had a feeling they wouldn't be laughing anymore. As I worked my way through the evening rush at the hidden gem, I could feel the weight of their stares from across the street. Melanie and her entourage weren't subtle. Their disbelief was written in their body language. Their confident smirks had melted into confusion, their laughter replaced by furrowed brows and whispered conversations. It was only a matter of time before their curiosity overpowered their pride. The first crack in their facade came when a distinguished older man arrived, a local philanthropist whose name carried significant weight in Boston's elite circles. He stepped out of his car, greeted warmly by my staff, and entered the restaurant with the ease of someone who knew he belonged. It was the kind of man Melanie and her friends would bend over backward to impress. And yet, here he was, walking into what they had called a dirty pub. I imagined their whispered questions. What's he doing here? Does he know something we don't? Then came the second guest, a prominent tech CEO whose face had graced the cover of countless magazines. He was followed by his wife, who was equally famous for her philanthropy work. They walked in as if this restaurant was their second home, and for them, it practically was. The CEO shook my hand at the door, expressing his excitement for the seasonal menu we'd created just last week. From across the street, Melanie and her friends must have been struggling to piece it all together. It wasn't just the high-profile arrivals. It was the way the staff moved with military precision, the elegance of the restaurant's understated interior, and the sheer quality radiating from the place. This wasn't a pub. It was something far more significant, and they were beginning to realize it. The tipping point came when a pair of food critics arrived. I recognized them instantly. Both had written glowing reviews for us in the past. They were escorted to their table with the kind of care and attention we reserved for our most important guests. One of them glanced toward the kitchen, catching my eye, and raised his glass in acknowledgement. I nodded back, feeling the thrill of knowing they were about to experience something unforgettable. By now, Melanie and her group were no longer watching discreetly. They were openly staring, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. It was almost comical. These were women who prided themselves on being in the know, on having access to the best of everything. And yet, they had completely missed this gem right under their noses. The final blow came when one of Melanie's more socially ambitious friends decided to investigate. I saw her cross the street, her designer heels clicking against the pavement, her expression a careful mix of curiosity and entitlement. She approached the maitre d' with a practiced smile, the kind that usually opened doors in their world. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with feigned politeness. "This restaurant, is it new? I haven't heard of it before." The maitre d', to his credit, didn't bat an eye. "The hidden gem has been serving guests for over a decade, ma'am," he replied, his professionalism impeccable. "It's an exclusive dining experience. Reservations are by recommendation only." Her smile faltered. "Recommendation?" she repeated, clearly unprepared for this level of exclusivity. "Yes, ma'am," he confirmed. "We prioritize guests who are referred by existing patrons. Our waitlist is currently 3 months long." She stood there, stunned into silence. Finally, she managed a strained, "I see," before retreating back across the street to rejoin Melanie and the others. I could almost feel their collective panic as the reality of their mistake sank in. From my vantage point in the kitchen, I allowed myself a small, private smile. This was better than any confrontation could have been. They had come to mock me, to belittle my work, and now they were scrambling to make sense of a world they had no access to. As the evening progressed, their presence outside became less bold. The chatter died down, their laughter faded, and their smugness dissolved into an awkward tension. I didn't have to do anything to prove my worth. My restaurant, my team, and the caliber of our guests had done it for me. By the time the last of Melanie's friends left, their faces pale and their confidence shattered, I felt no satisfaction in their discomfort. What I felt was pride, not in outshining them, but in knowing that my work, my passion, had made its mark without needing their approval. They had judged me, dismissed me, and now, they were the ones left to grapple with their own superficiality. And the best part? They still didn't know the full truth. They didn't know that the chef they had mocked, the husband they had belittled, was the very heart of the hidden gem. That revelation would come soon enough, and I had no doubt it would hit them like a freight train. For now, I was content to let them stew in their confusion. They'd set the stage for this moment, and they'd gotten exactly the show they deserved. Later that evening, after the rush had died down and the final guests had been served, I leaned back against the counter in the kitchen, reflecting on the day. It had been a good service, flawless, in fact. The kind of evening that reminded me why I had chosen this life. But there was something else lingering in the back of my mind. The realization that tonight wasn't over for Melanie and her friends? Not yet. They had left my view hours ago, but I knew their minds were racing. I could picture them, huddled together at the baby shower, the celebratory mood replaced by hushed speculation. Whispers would swirl around the room, fueled by the snippets of what they had seen across the street. The hidden gem wasn't a dirty pub. It was something more, something they didn't understand. And that lack of understanding would drive them to dig deeper. I imagined Melanie and her closest friend, Amanda, one of the loudest voices in the earlier mockery, grabbing their phones, searching for answers. Maybe they'd try to Google the restaurant, only to find limited information on our website. I had intentionally kept it sparse, a single page with our name, a brief description of our philosophy, and a note about the reservation process. No photos, no excessive details, just enough to intrigue the right kind of guest. But the reviews? Those would be unavoidable. Our glowing reputation was well documented in gourmet magazines, food blogs, and critic sites. Articles praising the hidden gem as one of Boston's most exclusive dining experiences would start to appear on their screens. Headlines like, "The Hidden Gem, Boston's Best-Kept Culinary Secret," or "Chef Liz's 2-Star Michelin Wonder" would jump out at them, and they'd start piecing together the connection. At some point, they'd stumble upon the mention of the head chef, Chef Liz, as I was known in the culinary world. The realization would be slow but inevitable. Elizabeth's husband, the man they had ridiculed and dismissed, wasn't just a chef. He was the chef, the creator of the restaurant they suddenly wished they could enter. I could imagine Melanie's reaction as the puzzle clicked into place. Her fingers trembling as she scrolled through article after article, her face pale as the truth sank in. She'd remember every comment she had made that evening, every dismissive glance and snide remark. And then she'd see the timeline, the dates lining up perfectly with the years she had spent underestimating me. 10 years of effort, success, and acclaim that she had ignored because it didn't fit her shallow narrative. And what about her friends? They'd be equally horrified, especially the ones who prided themselves on knowing all the best spots in town. They'd feel betrayed by their own ignorance, embarrassed that they had mocked what turned out to be one of the city's most sought-after dining experiences. Their mockery wasn't just misplaced. It was deeply ironic. But the best part of it all? The realization that they couldn't fix this. They couldn't simply book a table to save face. No amount of money or connections would get them past my carefully designed reservation system. They would need a referral from an existing patron, someone who had already been vetted and approved. And even then, they'd have to wait months for a table. As these thoughts played out in my mind, I felt no anger. If anything, I felt a quiet sense of validation. I didn't need their respect or their approval to succeed. I had built this restaurant from the ground up, brick by brick, dish by dish, with no shortcuts and no compromises. My work spoke for itself, and tonight, it had spoken loudly enough for Melanie and her circle to hear. I stepped out of the kitchen into the now empty dining room. The chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the tables, each one meticulously set for the next day's service. I walked to the window and glanced across the street, where the baby shower had long since ended. The lights were off, the venue silent, but I knew their conversations were far from over. Tomorrow, or maybe the next day, I'd hear whispers about their reactions. Someone from their circle would undoubtedly try to reach out, attempting to smooth things over or secure a reservation. I wasn't worried. My staff knew the protocol, and I trusted them to handle it. My life, my work, and my success didn't depend on their acceptance. It never had. I locked the door to the restaurant and stepped out into the cool night air, a satisfied smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Tonight had been a lesson, not for me, but for them. They had spent years judging me by appearances, by their own shallow metrics of worth. And tonight, those judgments had been turned on their heads. As I walked home, I thought about the days to come. Melanie and her friends had only just begun to unravel the truth, but there was so much more they hadn't seen. My story, my journey, and my accomplishments were far more than what they could grasp in a single evening. And soon, they'd realize that the man they had dismissed so easily wasn't just someone who suited a pub. He was someone they could never hope to match. The morning after the baby shower, I knew the ripples of the previous evening had already started to spread. Melanie and her friends were not the type to let a mystery rest. By now, they would have scoured every available source, trying to piece together how the dirty pub they mocked turned out to be one of the most exclusive culinary spots in Boston. But I also knew they wouldn't find everything. The true weight of what they had witnessed would take more than a quick Google search to fully sink in. Later that day, as I went about my usual routine at the hidden gym, one of the servers approached me with a knowing look. "Chef," he began, "there's a woman at the door asking about reservations. She didn't have an appointment, but she says she knows you." I didn't need to ask who it was. "Send the maitre d' to handle it," I said calmly, not even looking up from the sauce I was adjusting. They know the policy. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the maitre d' returned with an update. "Chef, it's your wife's friend Amanda. She's trying to use her connection to Mrs. Wilson to secure a table. She's insistent." "Is she now?" I said, a slight smirk tugging at my lips. "What did you tell her?" I reminded her that reservations are by referral only, and existing patrons must write a recommendation letter. She didn't take it well. I nodded, satisfied. Let her figure it out. The first cracks in their arrogance were starting to show. Amanda's entitlement had led her straight to my doorstep, but entitlement alone wasn't enough to gain access here. She was learning, slowly but surely, that the hidden gem operated on a different set of rules that valued substance over superficiality. Later that evening, another server approached me. "Chef," she said cautiously, "Mrs. Wilson is here." I froze for a moment, not out of surprise but out of curiosity. What had brought Melanie here so quickly? Was it guilt, desperation, or something else entirely? I removed my apron, wiped my hands, and stepped out into the main dining room. There she was, standing near the entrance in a designer coat that looked out of place against the understated elegance of the hidden gem. Her face was pale, her posture stiff. She looked like someone who had just realized the weight of her mistakes and had no idea how to fix them. "Melanie," I said evenly, folding my arms as I approached her. "What are you doing here?" She hesitated, glancing around the room as if searching for the right words. I wanted to talk to you," she finally said, "and maybe make a reservation." I raised an eyebrow. "You know the policy." "Yes, I know," she said quickly, "but you're my husband. Surely there's something you can do." Her voice wavered, and for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of vulnerability in her. But I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. Not yet. "The policy applies to everyone, Melanie," I said calmly, "including you." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked around again, taking in the quiet sophistication of the dining room, the effortless grace of the servers, the air of exclusivity that hung over everything. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she compared this to the image she had of me, a small-time chef running a pub. The disconnect was too wide to ignore. Finally, she said, "I didn't know, okay? I didn't know this is what you've been building." "That's because you never asked," I replied, my tone measured but firm. "You and your friends made assumptions, and you were happy to leave it at that. Why would I share this with people who don't care to understand?" Her face fell, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But I reminded myself that this wasn't just about last night. This was about years of dismissal, of her letting me become a punchline in her social circle. If she was here now, it wasn't because she suddenly valued what I did. It was because she felt embarrassed. "Please," she said softly, her voice barely audible, "I want to understand." I studied her for a long moment, searching for any trace of sincerity. Maybe there was some, buried under layers of pride and guilt. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "If you want to understand," I said finally, "you'll have to earn it." Her brows knitted together in confusion. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, leaning in slightly, "that you start at the bottom, just like everyone else here. If you want to understand what it takes to make something like this, you'll need to put in the work." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to process my words. "You want me to work here?" she asked incredulously. I nodded. "Exactly. No shortcuts, no special treatment. You want to see what this world is like? You'll have to experience it firsthand." She looked as if I had just asked her to climb Mount Everest. "I don't know if I can." "Then don't," I said simply. "But if you're serious, you'll figure it out." Without another word, I turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving her standing there. I didn't know if she would take me up on the offer, but for the first time in our marriage, I felt like I had drawn a line she couldn't cross with empty words or half-hearted promises. If she truly wanted to understand, she would have to prove it. And if not, well, that was her decision to make. For once, I wasn't waiting for her approval. I had all the validation I needed right here. After my conversation with Melanie, I returned to the kitchen, slipping seamlessly back into the flow of the evening. Orders came in, plates went out, and the hum of the restaurant continued uninterrupted. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of balance. My life, my work, and even this moment with Melanie, it all made sense now. I wasn't bitter, nor was I angry. What I felt was clarity. Melanie had been stunned by my proposal, but I meant every word of it. I wasn't going to spoon-feed her the respect she thought she could demand simply because of who she was. If she wanted to understand the life I had built, the effort I had poured into this restaurant, and the quiet pride I took in every success, she would have to work for it. And that, I knew, was a concept foreign to her. By the time the evening service came to an end, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. The kitchen was spotless, the staff was winding down, and the faint scent of rosemary and seared meat lingered in the air. I leaned against the counter and stared out into the now empty dining room. Every detail, the perfectly set tables, the sparkling glassware, the polished chandeliers, was a reminder of how far I had come. And Melanie's reaction tonight had only reinforced that. I didn't need her validation. Not anymore. For years, I had allowed myself to shrink under the weight of her judgment, her dismissive remarks, and her unspoken disappointment. I had convinced myself that it didn't matter, that her opinion was just another part of the background noise in my life. But tonight, standing in my restaurant, I realized that wasn't entirely true. Her disdain had hurt me, but not in the way she thought. It hadn't undermined my confidence or my ability. What it had done was push me to prove her wrong, not to her, but to myself. I wasn't interested in revenge or even in showing her up. My decision to invite her to work at the hidden gym wasn't about punishment. It was about giving her an opportunity to see what she had overlooked for years. If she truly wanted to bridge the gap between us, this was the only way. Words wouldn't cut it. Apologies, no matter how sincere, couldn't erase the years of condescension. Action was the only currency that mattered now. I thought back to our early days together, back when I first fell in love with her. Melanie had always been ambitious, but there had been a time when her ambition was grounded in something real, something authentic. She used to dream big, just like me. Somewhere along the way, though, she had traded those dreams for the shiny veneer of social status. She became more concerned with appearances than substance, more interested in what others thought of her than what she thought of herself. It wasn't just me she had dismissed. It was her own sense of authenticity. And yet, despite everything, I didn't hate her. I didn't want to see her fail. Deep down, I hoped she would rise to the challenge I had set for her. I hoped she would take that first step into my world, even if it meant starting as a dishwasher or a server. Because I knew that if she did, she would see things differently. She would see the pride in hard work, the beauty in craftsmanship, and the quiet satisfaction of creating something meaningful. She would understand, for the first time, what it meant to value substance over style. The sound of footsteps pulled me out of my thoughts. It was one of my sous chefs, a young woman named Clara who had been with me since the early days. She approached me with a curious expression. "Chef," she said, "is everything okay? You seemed different tonight." I smiled faintly. "I'm fine, Clara. Just thinking." She nodded, studying me for a moment before turning to leave. But then she paused. "Whatever it is, chef," she said over her shoulder, "I think you're handling it the right way." Her words lingered long after she left the kitchen. Maybe I was handling it the right way. Or maybe I wasn't. Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to compromise myself or my principles for the sake of making things easier. Melanie had to earn her place in this story, just as I had earned mine. As I locked up the restaurant and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of peace. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, for Melanie, for me, or for our relationship, but it was the right path. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. This wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about living my truth, unapologetically and fully. If Melanie could walk that path with me, so be it. If not, I would keep walking alone. Either way, I was finally free. The following week was quiet, at least on the surface. Melanie hadn't called, texted, or shown up at the hidden gym since our conversation. I wasn't surprised. The idea of starting from the bottom, of working her way into something rather than simply being handed it, must have been unfathomable to her. She'd built her life around appearances, around shortcuts and smooth paths paved by others. The thought of standing at a sink scrubbing dishes or taking orders from me, her husband, must have been unbearable. And yet, I noticed small signs that she hadn't dismissed my offer completely. A few of our mutual acquaintances, friends from her social circle who had always treated me as invisible, started asking subtle questions about the restaurant. I heard it's impossible to get a reservation, one of them said at a neighborhood gathering I happened to attend. Another commented on the feature in Taste of Boston that had recently named the hidden gem the city's best-kept secret. It was clear Melanie had been talking, even if she hadn't spoken to me directly. By the end of the week, the phone call came. I was in the middle of prepping for the evening service when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Seeing Melanie's name on the screen, I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Is your offer still open? I set down the knife I was holding and leaned against the counter. Which offer? I asked, deliberately making her spell it out. To work at the restaurant, she said, her words stumbling slightly. To start at the bottom. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence hang between us, giving her time to sit with the weight of what she was asking. Finally, I said, yes. The offer is still open. She exhaled audibly, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding for days. What do I need to do? I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. Show up tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Wear something comfortable and don't expect special treatment. You'll be starting as a dishwasher. There was a long pause on her end, and for a moment, I wondered if she'd hang up. But instead, she said, I'll be there. True to her word, Melanie arrived the next morning. She looked out of place standing at the restaurant's back entrance, her designer sneakers and carefully styled ponytail contrasting sharply with the utilitarian atmosphere of the kitchen. I greeted her with a curt nod, handing her an apron and pointing her toward the sink. You'll be working with Jose today, I said, gesturing toward our head dishwasher. He'll show you the ropes. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the controlled chaos of the prep team slicing vegetables, the line cooks preparing sauces, and the sous chefs reviewing the evening's menu. It was a world she had never been part of, and I could see the discomfort written all over her face. But to her credit, she didn't complain. She tied on the apron, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The first day was grueling for her. I made sure of it. Dishwashing wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy. The steam from the industrial sink left her hair damp, and by midday, her pristine sneakers were splattered with grease and water. Jose didn't go easy on her, either, barking instructions with the same no-nonsense tone he used for every new recruit. By the end of the shift, Melanie looked exhausted, her hands red and wrinkled from hours in the soapy water. How'd it go? I asked her as she untied her apron. She glared at me, but there was no venom in it, just a weary sort of resignation. It's harder than it looks, she admitted. Most things are, I replied. See you tomorrow. And she came back the next day, and the day after that. Each morning, she arrived on time, dressed down and ready to work. She didn't complain, even when the tasks were monotonous or physically demanding. Slowly but surely, she began to integrate into the rhythm of the kitchen. The staff, who had been wary of her at first, started warming up to her. Jose even joked with her one afternoon, calling her Mel instead of Mrs. Wilson. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. As the days turned into weeks, I saw subtle changes in Melanie. Her posture became less rigid, her tone less defensive. She asked questions, listened to answers, and began to appreciate the effort that went into every detail of the restaurant. One evening, during a quiet moment before service, she stood next to me at the pass, watching as I plated a dish. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. "Do what?" I asked without looking up. "Make it all look so effortless," she said, gesturing to the pristine plate in front of us. I smirked. "It's not effortless. It's years of practice. But if you love what you're doing, the effort becomes part of the joy." She didn't say anything, but the look on her face told me she was starting to understand. It wasn't an easy road, for her or for us. There were still moments of tension, still unspoken wounds that hadn't fully healed. But Melanie was trying, and that mattered more to me than anything. She was beginning to see the value in the things she had once dismissed, and in doing so, she was beginning to see me. For the first time in years, I felt hope, not just for our relationship, but for the possibility that Melanie might finally understand what it meant to truly value something. And for now, that was enough. Months passed, and Melanie's transformation became undeniable. The woman who had once dismissed my work as trivial now stood shoulder to shoulder with my staff, scrubbing pans, taking orders, and even assisting in prep work. Her manicured hands had grown rough from hours of hard labor, and her once perfect posture now carried the humility of someone who understood the grind. It wasn't just her actions that had changed. Her entire demeanor was different. There was a quietness about her now, a willingness to listen and learn that hadn't existed before. My staff noticed the change, too. Jose, our head dishwasher, spoke highly of her, a stark contrast to the skepticism he had initially voiced. Clara, one of our sous chefs, even started mentoring Melanie, teaching her basic knife skills and kitchen etiquette. It wasn't easy for her. Melanie struggled with the pace and precision the job demanded. But she never gave up. Every mistake was met with determination, every critique taken as an opportunity to improve. Slowly but surely, she earned the respect of the team. I watched all of this unfold with a mix of pride and cautious optimism. Melanie was proving herself, not just to me but to everyone around her. And while the scars of our past hadn't completely healed, her effort was undeniable. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same path, working toward something together. One evening, after the restaurant had closed, I called Melanie and my mother-in-law, Carol, to the dining room. They both looked surprised. Carol had also started helping out at the restaurant on weekends, assisting with table service and greeting guests. It had been her way of reconnecting, of trying to mend the years of distance between us. She had grown quieter, too, her once critical tone softened by the humility of seeing what I had built. The dining room was dimly lit, the chandeliers casting a warm, golden glow over the tables. At the center of the room, I had set up a single table, adorned with a simple arrangement of wildflowers. It wasn't flashy, but it carried the same intentionality that defined every detail of the hidden gem. "What's this?" Melanie asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the table. They obeyed, their expressions wary but intrigued. I disappeared into the kitchen for a few moments before returning with the first dish, a delicate amuse-bouche of New England clams, infused with subtle French flavors. I placed it before them and said, "This is where it all began." Melanie and Carol exchanged glances before taking a bite. Their eyes widened as the flavors hit them, a blend of nostalgia and innovation dancing on their palates. "This is incredible," Carol said softly. I smiled. "It's one of the first dishes I perfected when I was training in France. It reminds me of the long hours, the sleepless nights, and the determination that brought me here." Course after course followed, each one telling a story, a moment from my journey that had shaped not only my career but also the person I had become. Melanie and Carol listened intently as I explained the significance of each dish, their expressions a mix of awe and regret. They were beginning to see what they had missed all these years, the depth of passion and purpose behind my work. By the time the final course arrived, a dessert inspired by my grandmother's recipes, the mood in the room had shifted. Melanie's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked at me. "I never knew," she said, her voice trembling. I never understood how much this meant to you. To us. I nodded, my own emotions threatening to surface. That's why I didn't tell you, I admitted. Because you wouldn't have seen it back then. But now, you do. Carol reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. We were wrong, she said, her voice heavy with regret. We judged you unfairly, and we dismissed something truly remarkable. I see that now. The moment was raw, vulnerable, and deeply cathartic. It wasn't just an apology. It was an acknowledgement of everything I had endured, a recognition of the sacrifices I had made, and the quiet strength I had carried through it all. The next morning, I prepared a special brunch for Melanie, Carol, and their family. Just them, in the same dining room where countless VIPs had dined before. The meal wasn't about impressing anyone or proving anything. It was about reconnecting. Each dish was simple but filled with meaning, a reflection of the journey we had taken to reach this point. As Melanie cradled our baby girl in her arms, I saw a softness in her that hadn't been there before. She looked at me with a kind of respect and admiration that I had thought was lost forever. Carol, too, seemed at peace, her previous pretensions replaced by a genuine appreciation for the life we had built. That day marked the start of a new chapter, not just for me, but for all of us. It wasn't about revenge or validation anymore. It was about rebuilding, about finding value in the things that truly mattered. And as I looked around the table at my family, I realized that for the first time in years, we were finally beginning to understand each other. Outside, the streets of Boston were bathed in morning light, and the red brick walls of the hidden gym stood as a quiet testament to everything we had overcome. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a symbol of resilience, of love, and of the power of seeing beyond appearances to find true value. And as we shared that meal together, I knew we were ready to write the next chapter, together. Came in early, still numb from the funeral, determined to catch up on the backlog after 3 days of burying the only man who ever taught me what respect looked like. My father had been the kind of man who fixed his own car, who taught me to tie my tie for my wedding day, who told me to stand up straight when people tried to knock me down. I carried his lessons like armor, but even that couldn't blunt the shock when I opened my laptop and found the email. Just one line from Danica Klein, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman who also happened to be my boss. 8 years of marriage, 4 of those side by side in the same office, and she didn't even have the decency to call me in. No warning. No meeting. Just that cold, impersonal line. Clear your desk by the end of the day. HR will handle your exit paperwork. I read it twice, my eyes refusing to accept the words. She didn't even sign it with her name, just the default auto-signature with her title. VP of Operations. Like I was some vendor she'd grown tired of. I sat back in my chair, staring at the Boise skyline as the early light began to spill over the glass towers, streaking the windows with pink and gold. I'd been here before the skyline looked like this, when the tallest building was the bank, not some fancy tech tower. I'd helped build this company's reputation, its systems, its people. I'd stayed late for Danica's deadlines, carried her burdens like they were mine. I'd thought we were building something together, a life, a family, a business. But apparently, burying my father had been poor prioritization. I didn't reply. I didn't storm her office or throw my coffee at the glass wall that separated her from the rest of us. I took a screenshot, saving the email as a record, proof that I hadn't imagined it. Proof that this was real. Then I started packing my desk. Each item felt heavier than it should. The mug my father bought me that said, "World's okayest employee." The tiny cactus Jerome had given me after a particularly rough quarter. The photo of me and Danica at the holiday party, grinning like we'd figured it all out. I couldn't bring myself to look at that one for too long. I wrapped it in bubble wrap and placed it in the bottom of the box. Let the past stay buried, just like my father. The office was still quiet. No one else had arrived yet. I liked the silence. It gave me space to breathe. I unplugged my laptop, coiled the charger, and stacked the files I'd been working on. My resignation would probably ripple through the office like a dropped stone in a pond, but I wouldn't be here to see the ripples. That was Danica's mess to clean up. Maybe she'd finally get that promotion she'd been chasing all these years. Maybe she'd find a way to pin my absence on my performance. But I knew the truth. I'd never missed a deadline. I'd never left a client hanging. I'd built teams, not just projects. And the people in this office knew that, even if they didn't say it out loud. I took one last look around my cubicle, the place I'd spent more hours in than my own home. The Boise skyline beyond the window glistened in the sunrise, and for a brief moment, it almost felt like I was looking at a new beginning instead of an ending. My dad would have told me to walk out with my head held high, that no one, not even the person you trusted the most, could define your worth. So I squared my shoulders, lifted the box of my belongings, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed behind me, I felt the weight of every conversation we'd had in that office, every fight, every late night, every hopeful plan. The elevator hummed softly as it descended, carrying me away from the life I thought I knew. I didn't know where I'd land yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I'd find a way to stay steady, just like Dad taught me. Even when the current tried to drag me under. By the time the rest of the team filed in, the sun had climbed a little higher, casting slanted beams across the cubicles and landing right on the half-packed boxes at my feet. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, but I resisted the urge to send another message to Danica. I refused to give her the satisfaction of knowing how much her email had rattled me. Instead, I kept stacking textbooks, notes, and framed photos, each one a testament to nights spent shaping presentations or reworking proposals at her insistence. The hum of the fluorescent lights above was oddly comforting in its consistency, a reminder that some things in this office never changed, even when leadership did. Toby from finance appeared first, rubbing sleep from his eyes and blinking at the sight of me with a box of my personal effects. He wore his usual crisp white shirt and loosened tie, the ink stains on his fingers betraying the hours he spent reconciling budgets. He frowned as he set his coffee down on my empty desk. "Milo, is this for real?" he asked, voice low. I nodded without looking up, sliding a stack of spreadsheets into a folder. I didn't need to remind him that I'd headed up the project that had doubled our Q3 revenue. He already knew, and so did everyone else in this department. Before he could say anything else, Mira from logistics drifted over. She was carrying a to-go box from the cafeteria, her eyes widening when she saw the growing pile of boxes. She set her noodles down, eyes darting to the screen and back to me, confusion etched into her features. Jerome arrived next, earning a whisper of hope in the back rows before he noticed my packed-up state. His face hardened, and he knelt beside the box I'd set on the floor, as if he expected me to pull some kind of joke. But I said nothing, just pointed at the screen where Danica's email glared like an insult. He glanced at the monitor, mouth dropping open for a second before he closed it in a hard line. "Who do I punch?" he muttered under his breath. Jerome was 6'2" with shoulders as broad as a linebacker's and a grin that stopped fights. His loyalty was fierce. He'd been my right-hand guy for 4 years, the one who handled the team's breakdowns and saw me through my father's illness. I gave him a single, measured nod. The message passed in silence. There was no winning a fight with Danica by force. We needed strategy. Word spread like wildfire. My team gathered in a loose semicircle around my cubicle, eyes flicking from my packed boxes to the rest of our now hollowed-out workspace. I could see anger simmering in Toby's jaw, disbelief in Myra's eyes, and a cold, hard resolve in Jerome's stance. They didn't need me to tell them what to do. Loyalty had taken root deeper than any fear Danica might have instilled. They already knew how we'd built things here. Through long nights, broken deadlines, and late-night pep talks about how this project would mean something to all of us. Then Danica emerged from her office, appearing at the threshold in a designer suit that looked more suited to a boardroom than a startup's war room. She gave me a cool nod, her expression unreadable behind the frosted glass panels. There was something predatory in her gaze, like she was admiring a chess piece she'd just knocked over. I met her eyes only for a moment, then returned to sliding files into a box. My heartbeat steadied. I refused to let her see my pulse race. She didn't linger. She retreated back into her fortress of glass and steel. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Instead of greeting the customary flood of client emails, my inbox remained eerily empty. I could hear whispers across the office, hushed speculation, stifled anger, and a palpable sense of something cracking. I took a deep breath and turned to my team. "They think taking me out'll break the project," I said, voice steady. "But they're wrong. We built the backbone of this operation, and we're not going to just let one email dismantle all we've done." I could feel their eyes on me, something like relief sparking in the silence that followed. By lunchtime, the rumor mill had kicked into overdrive. Email chains about Danica's decision swirled. but no one had concrete details. I watched as toolbars slid across monitors, faces shifting from confusion to anger. My team's loyalty was no longer just to me. It was to the project, to each other, and to the sense of purpose that had bound us through tight deadlines and last-minute reschedules. They weren't running to Danica with questions. They were turning to me, even though I was the reason they were suddenly adrift. Mira shook her head, fiddling with her pens. "She just sent you packing without a conversation?" she asked, tone sharp. I nodded, and she glanced at the screen again, wariness mixing with betrayal. "I thought she respected you." Jerome leaned in, crossing his arms. "Respect doesn't mean shit when there's profit at stake." His words hit like a punch. I remembered every time we'd chosen to work late instead of going home, every time I'd covered for Danica's missteps. I believed she saw me as more than just muscle for her career. I'd been wrong. I set down the final box of my belongings and took off my lanyard, the one with my ID badge that still bore last quarter's MVP sticker. It felt heavier than ever as I unclipped it and dropped it into the box. Every step felt like a surrender, but I refused to let it feel like defeat. My team gathered in close, forming an unofficial huddle that could have been mistaken for a war council. We stared at each other, the unspoken commitment clear in the throttle of silence. We'd been through setbacks together, but this forced separation felt like something else. Something that demanded not retaliation, but reinvention. I met Jerome's eyes, and he nodded. "We need to regroup. We need a new plan." Toby cracked his knuckles and offered a wry smile to Mira. "I'll start reallocating budgets tonight. I know some contacts at Vertex. Harlan might actually listen to us. He's got vision, not just spreadsheets." Myra's tension eased slightly, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I'll back up everything on the server and clean up any loose ends. We can have our data ready to go within hours." Their determination lit a spark under me. "I'll reach out to contacts, set up meetings. We can't let this collapse be the last word." They began to disperse, each with a sense of purpose in their stride. I watched them go, the hum of the office shifting from muted whispers to the click of keyboards and the rustle of papers. Danica had thought firing me would send a message, but she underestimated the roots we'd planted together. When you've spent years fighting rot, you don't respond with fire. You respond with better construction, building structures that stand even when the old framework burns. I took one last look at the cubicle as it stood empty but not quite broken. The half-finished project plans, the sticky notes with reminders of meetings I'd scheduled, the photo of my father grinning at a fishing trip, these things weren't just memories. They were a testament to my work, my integrity, and the bonds we'd forged. I lifted the box and carried it to the elevator, heart steady. I wasn't leaving my team behind. I was leading them somewhere better. As the elevator doors closed, I felt that familiar surge of determination, like I could write the next chapter of my life with the same grit my father had taught me. I glanced at the email one last time, then hit delete. I didn't need that reminder of betrayal. I had enough fuel in my conviction to carry me forward. The doors shut, and I walked away, certain of one thing. You don't fight rot with fire, you build something so strong it can't be burned down. I arrived at the HR office late morning, the hallway fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished linoleum in a way that made me feel as if I were walking down a corridor built entirely from glass shards. A broken reflection of the place I'd once called my second home. Barbara Kent was already at her desk, perched behind a mountain of paperwork, her usual professional composure tempered by a tightness in her jaw and a flicker of sympathy in her eyes. She wore a navy blazer that hadn't changed since I first met her years ago, with a name tag that read Barbara, a small symbol of permanence in an office defined by shifting numbers and shifting loyalties. I slid into the chair opposite her, the vinyl squeaking under my weight. She cleared her throat, her gaze flicking between me and the stack of forms she'd laid out. Forms that represented the end of my career at Summit Edge. "Milo," she began quietly, "I'm sorry this happened the way it did." She slid the first document toward me. Severance agreement. The words felt foreign on her lips, like she was delivering a verdict she didn't want to pronounce. You qualify for 6 months of salary continuation, prorated benefits, and outplacement services. I nodded slowly and took the paper, skimming the legalese that spelled out every detail of my departure. The lump sum payment, the non-disparagement clause that forbidden me from speaking ill of the company, and the non-compete that silently threatened to keep me tethered to this city for another year. I set it aside and glanced at the next form. Release of claims. This one required me to waive any right to sue Summit Edge for wrongful termination or emotional distress. It was the catch-all that companies used to bury employees in a quagmire of legal obligations. Barbara watched me, her pen hovering over her notebook as if waiting for instructions. Finally, I picked up the email I'd taken a screenshot of, Danica's chilling directive, and slid it across the table. "You saw this?" I asked, voice measured. The moment I believed she had read it, her face fell, and a shadow passed over her features. "Yes," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't miss a single deadline during your bereavement leave, Milo. They approved your leave, and all your metrics were ahead of target." Her eyes darted away, then back at me, a flicker of frustration evident. "This is bad." I leaned back, folding my arms. "So, I'm told," I said. Barbara let out a sigh, flipping through the other forms. "This is the non-disparagement clause. This is the confidentiality agreement, and this is the scope of your non-compete." She tapped the last page gently. "They want you to keep confidentiality about anything you know from your time here, effectively silencing you from talking about the circumstances of your termination." I traced a fingertip along the line for my signature on the severance agreement. Signing these papers felt like scribbling my own obituary, a declaration that I was dead to the company. Yet, I refused to show hesitation. My father had taught me that if you wanted to know your worth, you had to stand for it. So I signed, each name a line etched with quiet defiance. Barbara stayed silent as I wrote my name, the pen moving steadily across the page, sealing my future in ink. When I placed the final form in front of her for her to date and countersign, she paused. I could see the conflict in her eyes. Did she want to resist this decision? Did she want to ask her superiors why they chose to discard someone who had delivered record-breaking growth? But the HR manual won over her instincts. She signed, stamping each document, then slid them back to me. The paper stack was heavier now, burdened with finality. I set the forms aside and pushed my chair back, rising to my full height. "Anything else?" I asked, my voice steady in spite of the churn in my gut. Barbara shook her head, but then, as I turned to leave, she called out softly, "Be careful, Milo. They'll try to sow seeds of doubt about you if you speak out. It's ugly." I paused at the door, turning back to face her. "Ugly is watching someone you trusted issue my death sentence by email," I said, my voice low but firm. "Ugly is seeing how quickly everyone falls in line when a single line of text is all it takes. But I'm not afraid of that." She offered a tremulous smile. "Just know that closing the door doesn't mean you have to burn the house down." I nodded, understanding her meaning. She believed in preserving dignity even in defeat. I gave a curt nod and stepped into the hallway, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat marking my departure. With every step, I could feel the weight of the non-compete clause tugging at me, trying to keep me anchored in the wreckage of this place. But I refused to be anchored. Out in the open air, I stopped at the lobby window and stared out at the Boise River glinting under the afternoon sun. My father's words echoed in my mind. "Son, let the current move. You just stay like the rock." I stood there, shoulders squared, absorbing the memory of his gravelly voice. That river had carved canyons and valleys over millennia, but the rocks remained, unyielding. I would be like that rock. I folded the final HR documents, placed them in my backpack, and slung it over my shoulder. Each page was a reminder of what had transpired, a proof of betrayal, and a ticket to a new future. I took one last look at the building. Summit Edge, with its gleaming logo and polished facade, looked like any other Fortune 500 company. But now I saw the cracks beneath the shine, the rot that could spread from a single decision gone wrong. I walked out of the building with my head held high. My heart wasn't light, but it was free. The non-compete clause might try to pin me to this city, but it couldn't cage my aspirations. I had proven my worth to the world, and a piece of paper signed by a compromised HR department wouldn't change that. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt something shift inside me, a resolve so fierce it warmed me from the inside out. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to Jerome. "Call me." He replied almost instantly with a thumbs-up emoji. I walked down the street, each step echoing against the buildings, the hum of traffic filling the void that Summit Edge had tried to leave in my life. My father's lessons guided me. Stay steady, stay true, and let the current move around you. Because this wasn't the end, it was just another beginning. 2 days had passed since I left Summit Edge, but my mind was still replaying Barbara's warning. Nothing will change. I had to prove her wrong. My phone buzzed that morning, a call from Harlan Pierce, CEO of Vertex Chain Freight. Harlan had a reputation for being a visionary, a man who saw potential where others saw only liabilities. I answered on the second ring. Milo, his voice rumbled, I've heard the rumors. Summit Edge let go of their highest-performing project lead while he was at his father's funeral. That takes a special kind of miscalculation. I could almost see his grin through the phone. I've got a position for you. Division strategist. Full control. Name your conditions. My heart pounded as I leaned against the kitchen counter in my apartment, the Boise River reflections dancing on the window. I'd been half expecting a call like this, but hearing it was different. Full control? I asked, brow furrowing. I want authority over my team's hiring and budgets. And one more thing. If anyone from my old team applies, give them a fair shot. I paused, listening to him consider. You'll have it, he replied with a confidence that warmed something inside me. Send them my way. I trust the judgment of the people who trust you. I hung up and exhaled, the tension easing from my shoulders. Harlan believed in what I'd built. He saw my team as an asset, not an obstacle. I stared out at the skyline, the sun glinting off the river like a promise, and felt a surge of optimism. This was what I'd been preparing for, an opportunity to not just rebuild, but to do it better, on my own terms. That afternoon, I sat with Jerome at a local cafe, the aroma of espresso mingling with the hum of casual conversations. He slid a freshly polished laptop across the table, fingers poised over the keyboard. I've set up a shared drive, he said, voice low. All our data, reports, and client contacts. We'll be ready to present to Vertex within hours. Everyone's eager. His eyes flicked to mine, a mix of excitement and gratitude reflecting in his gaze. We had a plan to bring the best of Summit Edge's project to Vertex, intact, vibrant, and unstoppable. I tapped a finger on the table, considering our next move. We need to let them know we're serious, I said. A formal proposal. Show them our metrics, our client retention, our projections. We built the spine of Summit Edge's operations. Vertex should see the value immediately. Jerome nodded, his long hair catching the light. I'll get Mira to finalize the data dashboards. Toby can rework the budgets and revenue forecasts. By the end of the day, we'll have something concrete. The next morning, I arrived at Vertex's gleaming headquarters, a contrast to the tense buzz I'd left behind. The lobby was sleek, with exposed brick walls wrapped in climbing vines and mid-century modern seating that invited collaboration. A receptionist greeted me with a nod. She already knew my name. I felt a level of respect here I hadn't seen at Summit Edge in years. Harlan met me in his office on the top floor, the large windows behind him revealing the city beneath like a tapestry. He extended his hand, and I felt the firm grip of a man used to making deals. Welcome to Vertex, he said, his smile genuine. I've read your proposal. Impressive. You and your team have delivered numbers that rival our strongest divisions. I want you to build us a new flagship department, a division that operates like a startup within the company. Consider it done, I replied, confidence steady in my voice. He waved to an empty seat beside his desk, and I sat, pulling out my notes. First step, integrate my former team. I want to meet with each of them, evaluate their skills, and bring them on. No favoritism, no shortcuts. Just fair assessments and opportunities. Harlan leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. I admire that. Loyalty is worth more than any bottom line, but respecting talent is priceless. He clasped his hands. When can you start? Immediately, I said. We shook hands, sealing my transition from betrayal to possibility. As I left his office, exhilaration buzzed through me. I made my way to the newly assigned workspace, a corner of the floor with open-plan desks, whiteboards waiting for ideas, and the hum of potential in the air. Back at my apartment, I dialed my former team one by one. Hey, Mira, I said when her caller ID popped up. We met at the same cafe where I'd met Jerome. She slid a folder across the table, her eyes bright with resolve. Everything you need is here, she said. Our client rosters, analytics reports, even the contact lists. I scrubbed the data. Vertex's servers will be ready. I nodded, pride swelling. Good work. Let's make sure they know why they should hire you. Mira smiled, the tension of the past week easing in her posture. Toby came in next, his usual crisp white shirt replaced by a sweater that hinted at relaxed confidence. He handed me a thick binder. Budgets, projections, cost analyses. I forecasted our first quarter growth, and it's looking like a 40% increase from the previous year. I reviewed the numbers, impressed. This is solid, Toby. Harlan will love these figures. His grin was a rare sight. We're going to give him something he can't refuse. Jerome and Amani, our tech wizard, joined soon after, each with a folder of meticulously organized details, dashboard mock-ups, code snippets, integration plans. Within 24 hours, I had a meeting with Harlan and the rest of the executive team. I stood in front of a large screen in the conference room, clicking through slides that outlined our strategy, retention rates, revenue projections, client testimonials, and the cultural overhaul that had kept morale high during the turmoil. Everyone watched in silence, nodding at the cohesive presentation. When I finished, Harlan smiled and turned to the room. Our next division leaders, ladies and gentlemen, he declared proudly. What they've built at Summit Edge is remarkable, and now it's ours. The room erupted in applause. I felt a swell of emotion, relief, vindication, pride. My team and I had turned a wrongful termination into an opportunity. I caught Myra's eye, and she winked. We'd lived through betrayal, but now we were thriving. That night, I walked back to my apartment, the city lights flickering like constellations guiding me. I reflected on how 2 days ago, I was signing away my career under fluorescent lights that felt oppressive. Now, I had authority, a team I trusted, and a purpose that extended beyond any single company. I realized Harlan's approach was different. He saw value in people, not just profits. Before falling asleep, I texted my old friends and mentors. I'm back in the game. Their replies poured in, congratulations, pride, and questions about my experiences. I replied simply, stay steady. Better is coming. And it was. Because Vertex didn't miss. They saw potential when others only saw conflict. They believed in what we could build together. I drifted off knowing that when everything else rushed past, I'd remain steadfast, just like the rock my father had taught me to be. The night air was crisp as I stepped out of the bar, the neon sign from inside casting a dim glow on the wet pavement. My phone still buzzed from the meeting I just left with Jerome, Toby, and Mira. We sat in a tucked-away bar near 8th Street, the kind of place where the booths were worn and the jukebox never stopped playing classic rock. We drank cheap beer, but the gravity of our situation made the atmosphere feel weightier than a fine whiskey. Jerome leaned forward, his elbow on the sticky table, eyes flicking to every corner of the dimly lit room. Danika's trying to pull together your files, he muttered, voice low. The New Point report is scrambled. Client calls are going to voicemail. Everyone's scared to touch anything. I stared into my glass, the amber liquid refracting the neon light. My mind ran through the possibilities. Danika still controlled Summit Edge's infrastructure. She could lock us out or delete our digital footprints. But I wasn't there anymore, and neither were 8 of my best people. We expected that, I said. We built redundancies for this. Mira, did you get the backups off the server? She nodded, her face pale but determined. All of it. New Point, Wilson, Hernandez. Everything's on a secure drive in Vertex's cloud. Clients have full access. We lose nothing. Her calm confidence steadied the room. If they erase a file, we restore it. If they change a record, we revert it. We're ready. Toby slammed his hand on the table, the sudden noise catching the attention of a couple at a nearby booth, but they quickly resumed their conversation. Our numbers show Danika's scrambling, he said, voice tight. Her email to the regional managers went out this morning. They're calling for status updates from us, but there's nothing to report because the team left. They're losing accounts. They'll drop further once clients see we've moved on. He shook his head, frustration etched into his features. They thought firing you would send a message. Instead, they've created a void they can't fill. I took a slow sip, letting the words sink in. The empty desks we'd left behind were more than just vacant cubicles. They were symbols of a collective exodus, a statement of loyalty that transcended a paycheck. No one needed to ask who to blame. Danika's actions spoke louder than any advisory board meeting. The storm's coming, I said, and they'll be drowning in it. Meanwhile, we have to stay ahead of the wave. Thursday's client call with Hernandez. Are we ready? Mira nodded, pulling her jacket tighter as the door to the bar slammed behind a late-arriving patron. We've prepared a joint statement, she said, scrolling through her phone. It's concise. Vertex Chain Freight now manages your account. We guarantee seamless transition. Your contacts remain the same. Thank you for your continued trust. It's cued to go out the moment we finalize their contracts. Jerome leaned back, folding his arms. Harlan greenlit the contracts this morning. All signatures are in. We hit send, and they'll know exactly where to call. He flashed a grin that held both excitement and relief. We were moments away from flipping the script. What had started as a firing had turned into an opportunity to showcase the power of our collective commitment. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly midnight, the city around us settling into a quiet hum. "Let's do it," I said. "Send it." Toby tapped a few buttons on his phone, and within seconds, our announcement rippled through the digital networks. We watched as red receipts popped up, clients who had stared at their screens this afternoon, uncertain if they'd be abandoned, now seeing a clear path forward. The tension in the room shifted. We'd taken the initiative. We had control. Jerome raised his beer. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice warm. "And to Danica's empty desks." We toasted, but our celebration was tempered by the reality outside these walls. We weren't just celebrating our triumph. We were bracing for the cleanup that came after the storm. The next day, I'd be meeting with Harlan to iron out the final details. But for now, the night belonged to a small band of survivors who refused to let betrayal break them. Morning arrived with a pale, hesitant light piercing through the clouds. I barely slept, my mind drifting between the flared reports and the faces of clients who depended on our stability. I dressed quickly, avoiding the memories that lurked in my apartment. Photos of my father, framed desk plaques, well-worn books on leadership. I locked the door behind me and headed toward Vertex, each step a reminder that I no longer belonged to Summit Edge. The Vertex lobby was quiet, save for the hum of the digital ticker scrolling through freight rates. Security recognized me, opening the door with a nod. I climbed the glass staircase to my office on the third floor, the indirect sunlight illuminating the sleek, modern space. My desk was pristine, waiting for me to fill it with the tools of our trade. A laptop humming softly, notepads stacked neatly, a whiteboard with highlighted goals for the quarter. I felt at home here in a way I never had at Summit Edge. I fired up my computer and saw the first signs of movement. Emails from clients acknowledging our message, some expressing gratitude, others asking questions about next steps. I responded swiftly, setting up calls, assigning Jerome to lead strategy sessions, and tapping Mira to finalize integration plans. The hum of productivity buzzed through my fingers as I typed. By mid-afternoon, I received a notification. Summit Edge had posted an internal announcement claiming staff shortages due to unforeseen circumstances and assuring clients that project continuity remains our top priority. The statement was a thinly veiled attempt to downplay our departure. I smirked. Their words rang hollow when their empty desk spoke volumes. I forwarded the announcement to my team with a single comment: prepare responses. Soon after, the phones began to ring. Clients called our new hotline, seeking confirmation, reassurance, details on timelines. We answered, empathetic but confident, guiding them through the transition. Each call strengthened our foothold. Each question answered with clarity chipped away at Summit Edge's credibility. By early evening, we'd secured 2 verbal commitments from major clients, ready to sign formal agreements the next day. As the sun dipped low, I walked down the corridor to find Harlan waiting outside his office. His expression was calm but eager. "I heard good things," he said, extending a folder. Inside were signed contracts, Wilson account, Hernandez account, and a new partnership with a West Coast distributor who had been on the fence at Summit Edge. I felt a wave of satisfaction. "They signed?" I asked, disbelief mingling with triumph. Harlan nodded. "They've been waiting for stability. And you gave them that." We sat in his office, reviewing the numbers. The room felt electric with possibility. "You and your team have done more in 2 days than they did in weeks," he remarked. "I want to make sure you get the resources you need for Q3. We're moving your operation into the penthouse suite of this building, floor-to-ceiling windows, dedicated servers, the works. Consider it done." I closed the folder, feeling a surreal sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Harlan. But this isn't just about resources. It's about trust, between us and the clients." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "You've earned every ounce of it." That evening, I walked back to my apartment with the city lights shimmering like stars at my feet. The weight of what we'd accomplished settled in my chest, a mix of pride and relief. I stopped at the edge of the Boise River, where the current whispered over the rocks. The water was darker now, reflecting the streetlights, but I saw my reflection staring back, steady, unbroken. I thought about how this journey began with a cold email, how betrayal had threatened to consume us, and how we'd turned that storm into wind at our backs. My phone buzzed with messages: congratulations, thanks, excitement for the road ahead. I replied with an anchor emoji, the symbol I'd chosen for our new division, a reminder that we would remain steadfast no matter how fierce the storm. As I stood there, Listening to the river's steady murmur, I felt a deep sense of peace. The empty desks at Summit Edge were no longer symbols of loss. They'd become monuments to our resilience. I took a deep breath, tight with resolve, and walked home, knowing the storm had passed, but the current would always be moving. I would stay like the rock, and I would forge something stronger on the other side. Saturday dawned cool and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing behind the scenes. I woke early, the familiar tension in my chest reminding me that this wasn't a weekend for rest. After showering, I dressed in jeans and a worn plaid shirt, comfort clothes for war rooms, not boardrooms. My phone buzzed with messages, one from Mira confirming a final audit of our confidential client database, another from Toby with updated projections for Vertex's Q3 revenue. I responded with "almost there," then checked my email. 7 applications from former team members sat in my inbox, each one a testament to loyalty forged in the fires of betrayal. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming by my side, and opened the first resume, Jerome's. His cover letter was simple: "I'd like to continue building under your leadership." I smiled, remembering our late-night strategy sessions and the battles we fought together at Summit Edge. A text popped up from Jerome. "Coffee at the usual spot in 10?" I replied, "Be there." I knew this moment meant more than a job. It was a vote of confidence that I couldn't take lightly. At our corner cafe, I found Jerome already waiting, cradling a mug of black coffee like it was Lifeline. He stood as I approached, offering a fist bump. "Milo," he said quietly, pulling out a manila folder. Inside were his certifications, a letter of recommendation from a client, and an outline of strategies he drafted for Vertex. His eyes were bright, resolute. "I'm in," he said. I nodded, emotions twisting in my throat as I recognized the depth of his commitment. "Glad to have you," I replied. We clasped hands, sealing a pact forged in midnight labors and mutual respect. The rest arrived in a steady stream, Mira with her analytics background sharpened even further, Toby with his finance acumen polished by weeks of budget realignments, Amani with her tech wizardry ready to deploy new dashboards. 2 others, Paul and Nalani, joined us, mid-level managers who'd worked under my guidance, each with their own collection of experience and a shared sense of urgency. They carried coffee in their hands and determination in their eyes. We gathered around a small table, laptops open, outlines spread out like battle plans. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice low but clear. "Vertex has green-lit our division. They've approved budgets, resources, and a mandate to transform. But it starts with you. I need you to fill out your paperwork today, hiring packets, non-disclosure agreements, everything. We need your start dates to be official by Monday." Their nods were uniform, a silent vow to stand by me through the tumult. "Our clients are expecting continuity, not excuses," I continued. "We're going to hit the ground running, showing them why they stuck with us." We spent the next 2 hours working in tandem. Jerome and Amani set up secure channels for file transfers, ensuring that sensitive data remained protected. Mira began mapping out client communication plans, her fingers flying over the screen as she drafted emails. Toby ran numbers for a 5-year forecast, his lips pursed in concentration. Paul and Nalani organized training schedules, determined to integrate the newcomers seamlessly. I felt a swell of pride as I watched them collaborate, each person bringing a unique talent to the table. This was why leadership mattered, not for titles, but for the sparks that lit under pressure. That afternoon, I met with Tate Olvera, a labor attorney I'd consulted the previous Sunday. He practiced out of a small office downtown, walls lined with framed law degrees and a handwritten quote, "Justice delayed is justice denied." I sat across from him, the sun streaming through the blinds, casting stripes across the desk. He reviewed the non-compete clause I'd signed, his brow furrowing. "This smells like wrongful termination and malicious intent," he said, tapping the clause. "Vertex can probably challenge this if they want, but you said you're not suing." I leaned back, feeling the tension ease. "I just wanted to make sure I'm clear to move on. I'm not here to litigate history. I'm here to build a future." Tate nodded, his expression approving. "Then you're free." With legal clearance in hand, I returned to Vertex, walking through the glass doors feeling lighter than I had in weeks. My team was in the war room, a conference area with whiteboards on every wall and sticky notes plastered with client names and project milestones. They looked up as I entered, eyes hopeful. "All set," I said, holding up the signed legal opinion. The relief in the room was palpable. I could almost see the weight lift from their shoulders. We turned our focus to outreach. By evening, we had scheduled introductory meetings with 3 major clients: the Wilson account, Hernandez contract, and the West Coast distributor who'd sat on the fence. Each of us took responsibility for a client, preparing personalized communication that underscored our commitment and our fresh start. I crafted a message that balanced humility with confidence. We acknowledged the upheaval, congratulated them on their resilience, and promised a seamless transition under Vertex's banner. Late into the evening, as the city lights blinked on outside the penthouse suite, we rehearsed our talking points. Amani tested the new dashboard on the projection screen, its colorful graphs and real-time analytics reflecting the possibilities we could already imagine. Mira reviewed the campaign drafts, and Toby fine-tuned the financial models. We joked about metrics and milestones, laughter breaking through the seriousness of our mission. For a moment, it felt like we were back at Summit Edge, but this time with a new chapter waiting to be written. At midnight, we finished our preparations. I gathered everyone in a circle, the glow of the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind us. "I know it hasn't been easy," I began, voice steady. "We left behind more than an office. We left behind betrayal, doubt, and fear. But here, right now, we're building something stronger. We're not just surviving this storm, we're using it to power us forward." Their nods and murmurs of agreement filled the room with a warmth that chased away the chill of Saturday night. As I walked home later, the air was cool against my face, and the distant hum of traffic mingled with the breeze. I thought back to the day I opened Danica's email, the shattered shock that had nearly taken hold of me. Now, surrounded by 7 of my best people, I felt anchored, ready to face whatever currents lay ahead. Our applications were more than just forms. They were declarations of trust, loyalty, and shared purpose. Before going to sleep, I placed a small stone on my windowsill, the one my father had given me years ago, smooth and worn from summers by the river. I whispered a silent promise. I would remain steady, no matter how fast the world moved. And with that, I drifted into a dream where the river flowed clear and unbroken, carrying me toward whatever lay beyond the bend. The ripple started quietly Monday night. An anxious whisper in the hallways of Summit Edge, a subtle tremor that no one saw coming until it was too late. I had just sat down to dinner at home, the Boise skyline glowing in the distance, when my phone buzzed. My hand trembled slightly as I read the text from Mira, "Wilson account off the books. We've got movement." I glanced at the clock, 7:34 p.m. Too late for normal business hours, but in the world of freight and finance, contracts never truly slept. I excused myself and stepped onto the balcony, the cool air brushing against my skin. I dialed Harlan's number, imagining the tension in his office across town. He answered immediately, his voice low and focused. "It's happening," I said, leaning against the railing. Wilson signed on the dotted line with Vertex. He exhaled. "That's huge. What about Hernandez?" I tapped a finger on the balcony ledge. "They finalized their paperwork this afternoon, and news just reached me. Hernandez's department had called to confirm our arrangement. They're moving their shipments next week." I could almost hear Harlan's grin through the phone. "Outstanding. And the board at Summit Edge?" Barbara's HR message, Danica placed on indefinite leave. "They're trying to spin it as an audit of leadership practices, but everyone knows it's because they lost 2 major accounts in 1 week." I paused, letting the gravity settle. "Their collapse is underway." Harlan's tone hardened. "Don't let up. Q4's coming, and we need to keep pushing. Cement our reputation as the division that never falters." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Understood. I'll rally the team." We hung up, and I exhaled, the air hissing as it left my lungs. The moment was surreal. A year ago, I'd been coasting on deadlines and old promises. Now, I was orchestrating the downfall of a company that had once cast me aside. I slipped back inside and gathered my laptop. On the screen, data scrolled like a ticker, clients transitioning, contracts expiring, projections confirming our trajectory. I fired off a secure message to my team. "Meet at Vertex at 8 a.m. We'll discuss next steps. Stay strong." The responses pinged back within seconds. Thumbs up emojis, exclamation points, one simple, "Let's go." Their energy propelled me forward. That night, sleep evaded me. I pored over spreadsheets, refining Q4 targets and adjusting forecasts to reflect our recent wins. The room felt like a war room, every chart a weapon, every client call a battle plan. Out the window, the city lights shimmered like a roadmap, guiding my thoughts toward tomorrow. Morning arrived with an electric bus. I arrived at Vertex early, the lobby calm but charged. Security nodded as I passed, a silent acknowledgement of my presence here, a tacit reminder of how far I'd come. In the conference room, the team was already gathered. Jerome, Mira, Toby, Amani, Paul, Nalani, and 2 new hires we'd secured earlier that week. Each face reflected fierce determination. I stood at the head of the table, sliding my laptop open. We knew this moment was coming. I began, voice steady. Summit Edge is collapsing. Danica's gone, and clients are fleeing. But we're not here to gloat. We're here to solidify our future. The next quarter is ours to lose. Eyes flicked around the room. Some were tense, others bright with anticipation. We have contracts signed and in the pipeline. Wilson, Hernandez, West Coast. Our task now is to exceed expectations, deliver on every promise, every shipment, every call. Jerome leaned forward. I've got teams ready to handle Wilson's logistics. We'll meet their Monday deadline. Amani's finalizing the integration of their tracking systems. We'll be seamless. He clicked the remote, and a live dashboard flickered on the screen. Shipment statuses, route optimizations, client feedback streams. The tech was a symphony of code and data, humming in harmony. Mira took over, outlining the communication strategy. We need targeted outreach, weekly check-ins, performance reports, personalized updates. Clients need to see that we're proactive, not reactive. We've already scheduled introductory calls for tomorrow. She displayed a calendar grid filled with color-coded entries, each client touchpoint planned like a chess move. Toby adjusted his glasses, pulling up a projected revenue model. Our projections for Q4 just increased by 20%. We need to revisit resource allocations, ensure we have enough trucks, staff, and warehouse space. I've already spoken to our vendor partners. They can scale with us. He flicked through budget lines and cost analyses, highlighting areas where we could cut overhead without sacrificing quality. I absorbed their updates, feeling the momentum build. Excellent work. Amani, coordinate with Jerome's logistics teams to finalize the Wilson rollout. Mira, ensure our communication templates are dynamic. Tailor them to each client's needs. Toby, confirm vendor agreements and finalize Q4 budget allocations by noon. Paul and Nalani, oversee the onboarding of the West Coast distributor. They need a dedicated contact person. Their nods were crisp, precise, each committed to their role. By lunchtime, the atmosphere felt electric, like we were riding a wave of inevitability. I stepped out onto the balcony for a breath of fresh air, the mid-afternoon sun warming my face. The Boise River in the distance sparkled like a promise. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift to my father's lessons. Be the rock, son. Let the current move around you. The current was shifting for me, sweeping away the wreckage of Summit Edge. I would remain unshaken. Back inside, I convened a quick huddle. Remember, we're not just taking clients. We're earning a reputation as the team that delivers when others can't. If Summit Edge is the cautionary tale, we'll be the blueprint. Jerome grinned, and the rest of the team echoed his resolve. We returned to our tasks, the hum of productivity swelling. Afternoon rains began, dark clouds scuttling across the sky, mirroring the turmoil back at Summit Edge. Danica's email had morphed into an apology memo, nothing more than sales pitch to retain clinging clients. But each message only underscored the collapse, empty desks, frozen phone lines, scrambling internal teams. Meanwhile, at Vertex, our phones rang nonstop, contract signings, billing confirmations, logistical inquiries. We answered each call, offering assurance, clarity, solutions. By the end of the day, we'd finalized a new partnership with a Midwest shipping consortium, an account Summit Edge had never pursued due to risk aversion. With resources flowing and confidence high, the consortium saw advantage in our aggressive approach. I sent out a company-wide announcement. We're expanding into the Midwest. Effective immediately, we'll establish a new logistics hub in Omaha. Congratulations to the team for making this possible. The congratulatory messages flooded in, internal cheers and external client kudos. That evening, I returned home, feeling the kind of fatigue that comes from hard-won victories. I sat by the window, watching rain streak down the glass, transforming the city lights into shimmering prisms. On my desk lay the email that had ignited this journey, Danica's cold sentence delivered at my father's funeral. It felt like a relic from another life, a specter I'd vanquished. I took a sip of coffee, strong and black, and reflected on our trajectory. Each challenge had sharpened us. Each betrayal had steeled our resolve. Summit Edge's collapse was more than just a victory. It was a lesson in leadership, loyalty, and resilience. I thought of my father's final words. Son, life will knock you down, but the rock stays. I placed my hand on the smooth stone he'd given me, tracing its contours. The current had brought me here, but I had remained steadfast. As night settled, I drafted an email to Barbara from HR, congratulating her on the board's decision and expressing my hope that Summit Edge's future might be brighter with lessons learned. I didn't expect a response, but writing it felt right, closure through grace, not vengeance. I turned off my laptop and looked once more at the river, its waters continuing their endless flow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more clients, bigger targets, deeper responsibilities. But as long as I stayed like the rock, I was ready for whatever came. I turned away from the window, closing the chapter on Summit Edge's demise and stepping into a future shaped by the storms we'd weathered and the strength we'd found together. 3 months after we'd picked up the pieces and set sail under Vertex's banner, I found myself in an office space that felt more like a home than anything I'd known before. Each morning, the sunlight slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting gold on the desks where Jerome, Mira, Toby, Amani, Paul, and Nalani already sat, heads bent over monitors as clients' dashboards flickered to life. I paused at the entrance to watch them work, Jerome directing a logistics reroute for a new Midwest hub, Mira tweaking a personalized client communique, Toby recalibrating our Q1 forecasts, Amani fine-tuning the analytics that predicted trends in real time. Their faces radiated a confidence I recognized as belonging not to me alone, but to the network of trust we'd built. We'd crushed every forecast. 35% growth in 2 months, 2 industry awards, innovation in supply chain, and excellence in client retention. And 4 new major clients, including 3 who'd walked away from Summit Edge citing we were the only team they trusted after the collapse. The statistics followed me everywhere, on the screensaver of my phone, in the celebratory banner in the lobby, in the congratulatory notes from Harlan that landed in my inbox like a steady drumbeat of pride. I'd learned to temper my satisfaction with humility. Success could flicker out as quickly as it had flickered in its Summit Edge, but for now, I let myself feel the warmth of accomplishment. That Friday, as the sun dropped low, I walked into my office to find a cake waiting on my desk. It was simple, buttercream frosting, Happy Defection Day written in precise blue icing, and a single candle that felt almost ceremonious. I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out with a hidden camera. Instead, my old crew filed in, beaming. Jerome passed me a slice, Mira handed me a coffee, and Toby tapped the cake plate with a plastic fork. "We wouldn't have made it without you," he said softly. "We all signed up to follow you." Their words landed deep, reminding me why I'd chosen to build rather than burn bridges. Harlan appeared in the doorway, his tailored suit cutting a sharp figure against the warm glow of the setting sun. He wore that serious expression that creases his forehead, but his eyes shone with something I recognized as approval. "You've made this division the crown jewel, Milo," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Expect a promotion soon." I offered him a slice of cake. He declined but smiled, that rare curve of his lips telling me the confidence he placed in our work. Later that evening, I sat at my balcony, the Boise River shimmering in the lamplight. My phone buzzed with a message from Barbara Kent, Summit Edge being acquired. Danica blacklisted. You won. I stared at the words, letting them settle in like a final punctuation. I thought about the long journey from that cold email to this moment. How I'd refused to let betrayal define me, how I'd stayed like the rock while everything rushed past. I tapped out a reply. "Thanks for letting me know." Onward. Below me, the city lights twinkled, and I felt a contentment that wasn't rooted in victory but in the knowledge that I'd honored my father's legacy. I remained steady, letting the current move around me, and in doing so, I discovered what true leadership meant: resilience, respect, and the indelible power of loyalty. 1 year after Dad's funeral, I stood on the bank of the Boise River before dawn, the water rushing silently beneath a sky still heavy with night. The air was cold, sharp enough to pull my breath into my lungs with a sting. I tightened my coat around my shoulders. I was tracing the current as it carved its path around unmoving rocks. Just as Dad had taught me, stay like the rock. Let the current move around you. I closed my eyes, feeling echoes of everything that had happened since that morning 8 months ago when Danica's email had shattered my world. Losing my job, scrubbing backup files, rallying a team, outpacing Summit Edge, building Vertex's premier division, and finally watching the company that had discarded us crumble under its own miscalculations. Each moment had been a tumbling eddy. But I had stayed solid, unshaken. Now I felt different under this sky. The ache left by Dad's absence remained, but beneath it was something new, a steady confidence that came from knowing I had survived storms more vicious than any forecast. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another message from Harlan. New division charter approved. Your leadership is legacy. I smiled, picturing his stoic face breaking into an almost rare grin. I typed a quick reply. Thank you. Let's keep pushing. Even as far as I'd come, the work was never truly done. Success could not be a destination. It was a constant commitment to staying true to what Dad had taught me. Integrity first, loyalty always, and never letting rage at betrayal become the engine of your decisions. I pocketed my phone and looked downstream, where the first pale light of morning shimmered on the water. I thought of Jerome, Mira, Toby, Amani, Paul, and Nalani, the crew who'd refused to let me face that cold email alone and had followed me through each upheaval. They'd transformed unexpected termination into an opportunity to build something better, and together we'd crafted a workplace where people came before profit, where our bosses valued voices as much as numbers. Danica had called me for a reaction, but she never understood that people weren't cogs. They were the very foundation of any enterprise that claimed to lead. She tried to measure loyalty by rigid metrics. We measured it by the perseverance of shared purpose. Ahead of me lay a new horizon, forging a corporate culture that carried forward my father's lessons beyond my own tenure. Vertex had pledged resources to expand our division nationally, to innovate in ways that no other freight company dared to imagine. As we prepared to open our third regional hub, I knew success would hinge on remaining humble. The river didn't boast of its journey. It simply kept flowing, powerful yet unobtrusive. I would emulate that flow, steady, unassuming, relentless. When the first orange sliver of sun peaked above the horizon, I dipped my hand into the cold stream, feeling the current slip around my fingers. The rock remained, unmoved beneath the water's relentless push. I felt that strength surge inside me. I took a deep breath and turned toward the city, each step away from the riverbank a commitment to lead with grace rather than anger, to build rather than destroy. Dad's legacy wasn't buried in the ground. It was alive in every choice I made. Steady as the rock, I walked home to a world I'd remade and a future I was ready to shape. I didn't expect a red carpet. I didn't need applause or camera flashes. Honestly, I didn't even need a seat at the front. I just wanted to be there, to show up for her, to make her proud, to remind her that she didn't get here alone. That behind every milestone of hers, there was someone quietly standing in the shadows, clapping the loudest. That someone was me. That night, I stepped out of the car a little earlier than planned. I wanted to surprise her. The black tux I wore was the same one from our wedding, tailored again, a little tighter around the shoulders now. I held a small, elegant box in my hand. Inside was a Mont Blanc timepiece, limited edition, black leather band, sapphire crystal face. She'd once mentioned it casually when passing through a boutique in Milan. Understated but powerful, she said. Just like you. I walked up to the venue, heart light, steps firm. The lights from the ballroom streamed through tall windows like golden silk. It was Argento and Gray's 10-year anniversary, a night Isla had been working toward for months. Actually, for years. And I'd helped build it, piece by piece. From quiet dinners discussing strategy to weekends I gave up so she could rehearse speeches. From seed capital to late-night coffee runs. The foyer was buzzing with guests. Men in tailored suits, women in elegant gowns, champagne flutes clinking softly as jazz floated in the background. I approached the reception desk, smiling. "Reed Callahan," I said, adjusting my cuffs slightly. "Here for Isla." The young woman behind the desk typed something. Then again, her expression shifted. "I'm sorry," she said, voice polite but brisk. "I don't see that name on the list." I blinked, surprised but calm. "Could you check again?" "I'm her husband." She hesitated and glanced toward a man standing near the door, earpiece in his ear, hand resting on his belt. "Security. I'll call someone," she offered, clearly uncomfortable. Moments later, a tall man in a charcoal gray suit walked toward us. I recognized him instantly. Damon, Isla's CFO. We'd met a few times. He gave me a cursory nod. "Reed. Hey. There seems to be a mix-up with the guest list," I said lightly, still holding the gift box. Damon didn't bother to look at the list. "This event's just for core staff and major stakeholders." I frowned. "I helped fund this event." "Right," he said, glancing at his watch. "But you're not technically part of the leadership team." That stung. I opened my mouth to reply, but he beat me to it, turning to the guard nearby. "He's not on the list. Please escort him out." The guard stepped forward gently but firmly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." I didn't speak. Not yet. And then Damon, as he turned back toward the ballroom, said it. Not even under his breath. "Get this beggar out of here." That's when the room seemed to slow. Beggar? I stood there, tux perfectly pressed, holding a gift that cost more than the average rent in the city, and somehow in their world, I was a beggar? I looked past him into the ballroom. There she was, Isla, standing under a chandelier, surrounded by executives and board members. Her dress was emerald green, her smile wide. She was radiant, powerful, exactly how I'd always wanted her to feel. But something inside me, something buried under years of quiet sacrifices, cracked. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. Instead, I turned. I walked back down the marble steps, past the valet who smiled politely and clearly had no idea what had just happened. I didn't give him the ticket for the car. I needed a moment. I walked 2 blocks in silence, still holding the box. My phone buzzed once, probably a promotional email. Not Isla. She didn't know yet. Or maybe she did. Maybe it was intentional. I wasn't sure what was worse. I sat on a cold bench outside a closed bakery and finally opened the box, not to look at the watch, but just to breathe. I stared at the clean design, the engraved backplate that said, "For all the time you gave me." The irony nearly made me laugh. It wasn't just a watch. It was a thank you, a symbol, of time spent supporting her dreams, of hours and years I gave without asking for much. Not credit, not a seat at the board, just respect, just a place at her side. And yet, on the night of her biggest celebration, the man who watched her rise from shaky proposals to Forbes interviews had become invisible. Worse, unwelcome. I wasn't angry yet. Not really. I was numb. Numb in the way you get when you realize the person you built your world around never really built theirs around you. I sat there for almost an hour, thinking, replaying conversations. The times I said, "Let's wait on that vacation, put it into the company instead." The nights I packed her lunches before big pitch meetings. The time I stayed up until 4 a.m. adjusting her keynote slides because her designer quit last minute. How many of those sacrifices had become expectations? And how many of those expectations had turned into erasure? I walked home. I didn't slam doors or throw the watch against the wall like some bitter ex in a soap opera. No, that wasn't me. I walked into our apartment, clean, minimalist, filled with curated art pieces she loved, and placed the watch on the marble counter. Then I stood still, and something in me shifted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. I realized that somewhere along the line, I had been edited out of the story. I was the invisible ink in the footnotes. And now they were celebrating the novel, pretending I never helped write the first chapters. I looked around at the space we built together. And for the first time in a long time, I started thinking, not about how to support her next move, but how to make mine. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker like it might give me answers. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. No footsteps on the marble tiles. No humming from the bathroom as Isla got ready. No scent of her perfume floating through the hall. Just silence. Heavy and clear. She'd stayed out after the gala. Of course she had. Probably went straight to the hotel suite they'd booked for the night. A perk I'd prepaid with my own card 3 months ago when I still believed I'd be at her side, smiling for pictures and clinking glasses. When I still believed I was part of the journey. I took my coffee black. No cream today. Something about sweetness felt wrong. As I stood by the window looking over the city we'd carved our lives into, my mind wandered back through the years. Quiet, steady memories that now played like proof in a courtroom. We met when Isla was just launching Argento and Gray. Back then, it was her and a small rented office with peeling paint and a stubborn thermostat. I remember bringing her takeout during late nights, setting up a makeshift whiteboard with sticky notes because she couldn't afford one. I remember pulling out a small loan under my name to help cover her first marketing run. "It's just until we land that first big client," she'd said. "You'll get it back." I wasn't looking for reimbursement. I was looking for partnership, for something we could build together. But somehow, over time, it became her dream and my responsibility, her spotlight and my shadow. She started climbing fast, networking, closing deals, building a brand. And I clapped. I clapped even when she stopped introducing me as her husband at some events, opting instead for Reed, he works in finance, as if that explained my presence better. She loved the image. The story of the girl boss who made it on her own, who rose without help. And I let her tell it. because I loved her. But now? Now it felt like I'd paid for a ticket to a movie I wasn't allowed to watch. Worse, like I'd funded the production and been cut from the credits. I pulled open the drawer next to the fridge where we kept old receipts and warranties. Most people forgot about those drawers, messy little timelines of financial choices. I didn't. I kept every receipt, every bank statement, every invoice tagged and filed. I'd always been meticulous. Isla teased me about it once, said I was financially romantic. I guess that's one way to say, you're doing all the boring, important things while I take the glory. That drawer held our real history. A lease payment here. A conference fee there. New laptops for her interns. Office chairs. Flights to meet clients. Promotional videos. Staff bonuses, 12 of them, signed under my account. Most people would have seen a pile of expenses. I saw love letters. The kind that don't get framed or posted on Instagram. As I sifted through them, I realized something. I wasn't just forgotten. I'd been used. Silently. Willingly. And maybe that was the worst part. How easily I'd let it happen in the name of love. When Isla finally walked through the door at noon, she looked collected. No shame. No apology. Just her usual poised self in designer sunglasses and a blazer I'd gifted her last Christmas. She took them off and looked at me like I was a minor inconvenience. "Read," she said, setting down her bag. "About last night," I raised a hand gently. "You don't have to explain." But of course she did. It was a curated event. We had to keep the guest list tight. Sponsors, investors, internal leads, you didn't think I qualified. Her eyes darted. It wasn't personal. That was the line that did it. That's when I finally looked her in the eye and said, it was always personal. You just stopped seeing me as part of it. She rolled her eyes. "Reed, don't do this. You're being dramatic." I almost laughed. Dramatic? After being thrown out of a party I helped pay for? After hearing someone call me a beggar while my wife stood beneath chandeliers I'd funded? I didn't argue. Instead, I walked over to the dining table, placed a folder down, and slid it toward her. "You want to talk facts? Let's talk." She opened it, confused. Inside were neatly printed spreadsheets, expenses tracked over the past 7 years. My name, my cards, my accounts, a timeline of invisible support. Each column was labeled, date, purpose, payment type, amount, notes. Total support value, $198,740.34. She stared at the number. "What is this?" "Our story. The part you never tell." She said nothing. I leaned back in my chair. "You didn't just forget me. You erased me. And I let you. Because I thought love was about giving. But at some point, love became an invoice with only one name at the bottom. "Reed," she started, but stopped. "I didn't ask you to do all this. You expected it." And I kept delivering. Her expression shifted, defensive, proud. "This isn't fair. You always said you believed in what I was building." "I did," I said. "But now I realize you were never building it with me. You were building it on me." The silence between us felt thick, almost physical. Like we were sitting in the ruins of a home we both pretended was still standing. I stood up slowly and looked at her for a long moment. "You don't need to apologize," I said. "I'm not looking for that." "Then what do you want?" I gave a small, tired smile. "Nothing. For once, I want absolutely nothing." And I meant it. There's a special kind of grief that comes from realizing you were never truly seen. That you were loved for your usefulness, not your presence. And that once your usefulness runs out, you become disposable. That night, I didn't touch dinner. I sat on the balcony, sipping a glass of wine alone, watching the city lights flicker on. Isla stayed in her office down the hall. Doors closed. Walls growing. I didn't cry. I didn't pack a bag. Not yet. I wasn't done thinking. I wasn't done feeling. But the shift had already begun. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet voice whispered, "She doesn't get to do this again. Not without consequence." I didn't plan to go to the gala. Not really. Originally, I thought I'd just leave the gift on her desk, send a quick text, and head back home. Let her shine. Let her have her moment. That's what she always said she needed, space to be seen. And for years, I gave it. But something about that night pulled at me. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was foolish hope. That maybe, just maybe, after everything I'd poured into her company, into her, I'd show up, and she'd look at me like she used to. With warmth. With gratitude. With even a sliver of the love I'd spent years wrapping around her like armor. So I ironed the tux. It wasn't new. but it still fit like it had the first time. The same one I wore when we danced under dim fairy lights on our wedding night. Back then, we couldn't afford a ballroom. We'd rented a small community space, filled it with second-hand string lights and borrowed chairs. She had whispered to me, "Someday, we'll host something in a place like that," pointing at a glossy ad in a bridal magazine. I remembered that ad now, because it looked eerily similar to where the Argento and Gray Gala was being held. The irony was sharp. We made it, and I had helped us get there. So I went. Quietly. No driver. No fanfare. I booked a cab, stepped out 2 blocks away, and walked in with the timepiece in my inner pocket, fingers resting against the box like I could transfer some warmth into it. I passed guests in velvet and silk, voices spilling into the street. My name wasn't on the list. I already knew that. I wasn't here for a seat. I was here to see it with my own eyes. I stood on the sidewalk across from the entrance, behind the valet station, just out of view. And there she was. Isla, my wife. Centerpiece of the night. She glided down the carpet like she was born for it. Cameras flashed. Her silver gown caught every light like a mirror. She waved, smiled, laughed, rehearsed but captivating. I watched her pose with executives, board members, and, yes, Jared. Jared. Tall. Tan. That fake casual confidence he always carried like a trophy. He was standing too close. Too familiar. Whispering something in her ear that made her laugh in a way I hadn't heard in months. Not at home. Not with me. I stepped back into the shadows, my stomach twisting, not from jealousy, but from clarity. I didn't belong here. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because they had carefully edited me out. I tried not to be bitter. Really. I tried to remind myself that ambition changes people, that success shifts the dynamics, that sometimes people forget themselves in the process of becoming someone new. But the more I watched, the harder it became to excuse what I was seeing. They toasted with crystal glasses. The ballroom, draped in white and gold, held over 100 guests, all handpicked, all included. And yet, not one of them had my name on their lips. Not even hers. I stepped closer, drawn in by the sound of her voice over the mic. A toast. "I want to thank the people who believed in me when this was just a dream," she said, chin lifted, eyes sparkling. "To my team, my partners, and my co-founder in spirit, Jared Gray, you are the other half of this company's heartbeat." The room clapped. Loudly. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. She continued, "To those who gave me space to grow, who cheered from the sidelines, thank you. This isn't just my night. It's ours. Sidelines. That's where I live now. A faceless cheerleader in the shadows. A thank you lumped in with general gratitude. Not a name. Not a face. Not even a nod. I looked down at the gift in my pocket. It felt heavier than before. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I think I was still holding on to some hope. So I did something stupid. I tried to go in. Not to crash it. Not to make a scene. Just to say congratulations. To see her. Face to face. Maybe feel like I existed again. That's when the security guard stopped me. The same scene replayed. "Name." I told him. He didn't even look at the list. "You're not cleared for entry." I asked, quietly, if he could check again. He didn't. Instead, he looked to the side, and there stood Jared. He walked over with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Reed. Hey, sorry man. This is kind of an internal thing." I looked him over. "Internal?" "Yeah, you know. Staff, stakeholders. It's been tight. I paid for half the venue," I said calmly. He raised his eyebrows. "You were reimbursed." I wasn't. He gave a low chuckle, like I was making something awkward. "It's not the time or place, buddy. You'll make her uncomfortable." And that's when I saw Isla, watching, from inside the doorway. Our eyes met. She didn't come forward, didn't wave, didn't say anything, just looked. And then she turned her back. The guard took a step forward. "Sir, I'm leaving," I said, lifting my hand. But Jared, because he couldn't help himself, leaned in and muttered, "This is her world now. Might be time to stop holding her back." That was it. I didn't punch him, didn't throw the box, didn't scream. I just smiled. That quiet, chilling kind of smile. Because I knew something he didn't. He might have had the lights, the champagne, the crowd tonight. But the moment she needed the foundation of that world, the quiet deposits, the funding, the favors, the loyalty, it would all start shaking. And I would no longer be there to hold it still. I walked away. the box still in my pocket. I passed the photographers, the valet, the crowds. I didn't turn back. Not once. Because I'd finally seen it clearly. I wasn't a part of the celebration. I was the scaffolding they used to build it, and then discarded the moment the building stood tall enough. And now? Now I was done pretending that was okay. When I got home that night, I didn't switch on the lights. I didn't need to. The apartment was already too familiar. Every chair, every painting, every shelf placed just how she wanted it. I sat down at the dining table, the gift box still in my jacket pocket. The weight of it had shifted. It no longer felt like a symbol of appreciation. It felt like a receipt. A reminder of how long I'd been paying for a love that had quietly gone bankrupt. I reached for my laptop. It was sitting where I always left it, centered, charged, clean. I opened it like I had 100 times before. But tonight, it wasn't for spreadsheets or budgeting. It was for action. I went to the first tab I'd bookmarked weeks ago, our anniversary trip to Bora Bora. A private villa on the water, complete with a chef, couples massage, and underwater dining experience. I had paid the deposit in full, $13,500. A surprise. One I never got to reveal because she'd been too busy with back-to-back strategy sessions. Click. Cancelled. Refund processed. Next, the Aspen Leadership Retreat. This one wasn't for us, but for her team. She told me the board needed a high-end bonding getaway to pitch to new investors. I'd paid the travel agency directly $18,000 for accommodations, ski passes, and executive lodging. Another favor. Another unthanked gift. Click. Access revoked. Confirmation email sent. Then came the corporate software license renewal, $7 for 100 from my consulting card. I logged into the vendor dashboard and updated the billing details to an empty shell account. Automatic renewal. Disabled. And the final blow, her upcoming executive lounge renovation. She wanted a private space in the office to think, complete with custom furniture and mood lighting. I'd already wired $21,400 to the design company, scheduled to complete in 4 weeks. I made a single phone call. "Reed Callahan," I said, calm and polite. "I'd like to cancel the upcoming installation. Please issue a stop order." The payment was personal, not corporate. "I'll send written confirmation now." They complied. It took less than 90 minutes to undo over $60,000 worth of support. Money she never questioned. Support she never asked about twice. She just assumed it would be there, because I had always made sure it was. But not this time. By 2 a.m. I was still staring at my screen. The numbers weren't just digits. They were chapters of a story I hadn't realized I'd been writing alone. I thought about all the ways I'd said, "I love you," over the years without ever using those words. In hotel confirmations, in paid invoices, in arranged meetings, fixed computers, last-minute florist runs, and "don't worry, I've got it" texts. And not once had she stopped to ask if I was okay, if I needed something, if I felt seen. She used to. In the beginning, she'd hug me from behind while I made coffee. She'd say things like, "I couldn't do this without you," or "You're my favorite person." And then those phrases stopped. They were replaced by, "Did you pay the caterer yet?" Or "Can you call the driver?" Slowly, love became logistics. Marriage became management. And now? Now I was reducing my role back to zero. I logged into our shared calendar and deleted myself from every upcoming event. No +1 at her award dinner. No appearance at her quarterly fundraiser. I even removed my saved contacts from her PR firm's holiday mailing list. And finally, I did something that made my chest feel tight. I opened the shared folder labeled Callahan Argento Finances. I created a copy, renamed it Final, then removed my access from the original. I wasn't just pulling the plug on funding. I was pulling the plug on pretending. At 3:12 a.m., I received a notification, "Calendar change alert, Aspen Retreat booking removed." I ignored it. Then came a second, vendor balance dispute, email from events manager. Then the text, "ISLA, Reed, did you change something with the Aspen thing? Just got a weird message." I stared at the screen. Not "Hey," not "Can we talk," not "Are you okay?" Just straight to the transaction. I didn't reply. I shut the laptop slowly and stood in the middle of the kitchen, breathing in the silence. I looked around at the glass jars on the shelf, labeled, color-coded, perfectly stacked. All her design. All her world. I built it, but it never became mine. I walked to the bedroom, slid the Mont Blanc watch box onto her pillow, Then I packed a bag. Not to leave permanently, but enough to make the silence noticeable. As I zipped the suitcase, a memory crept in. Her voice from years ago. If I ever get too big for myself, promise me you'll remind me who I really am. I almost smiled. Because this was that moment. And she hadn't even noticed it arrived. At exactly 7 p.m. the next evening, my phone lit up. I had just poured a glass of scotch, nothing fancy, just something smooth enough to take the edge off, and was sitting on the balcony of the hotel I checked into that morning. A small place. Quiet. Nothing like the marble and glass loft Isla and I called home. But it felt real. Simple. Honest. The screen buzzed again. I saw 2 missed calls. I let it ring out. Then came the texts. I saw read. Did you cancel the Bali suite? Isla. What's going on with the Aspen payment? The agency said the deposit bounced. Marcy, her assistant, hey. Sorry to bother you, but quick question. Did you change the payment method for the gala videographer? They emailed about a voided charge. Super confused. I took another sip and scrolled. Jared. Yo. Did you pull the plug on the caterer? What the hell, man? That one made me pause. Man. He had never called me that before. Never messaged me directly unless it was about logistics. Always filtered his needs through Isla. But now? Now they needed me. Not because they missed me, but because the foundation was crumbling, and the person who kept it level had finally stepped back. The flood came next. Ping, ping, ping. A waterfall of alerts from the payment processor. Notice, autopay failure, Argento and gray annual licensing renewal. Reminder, travel itinerary voided. Contact your agent to reschedule. Warning, office renovation project paused due to insufficient funds. I set the phone down without replying, not because I was being cruel, but because silence, real, deliberate silence, speaks louder than any revenge speech or petty argument ever could. At 9:41 p.m., another call buzzed in. Then another. Then another. By the time I finished the scotch, the tally was 36 missed calls, 17 texts, and 2 voicemails, both from Isla. I didn't listen to them. Instead, I walked to the hotel lobby, handed the front desk a polite smile, and requested no further calls be patched through to my room. I turned off notifications, placed the phone face down on the nightstand, and for the first time in what felt like years, I went to sleep without a to-do list waiting in the morning. But rest doesn't always bring peace. I woke up at 6:13 a.m. to soft knocking. At first, I thought it was housekeeping. Then I heard it. That voice. Tired. A little frantic. Muffled through the door. Reed, are you in there? I sat up slowly. She knocked again. Please, just open the door. I didn't move right away. I just listened. Her breathing was uneven. No heels today. No confident footsteps or clipped tone. Just Isla. Raw. Stripped of pretense. Not the version she gave the media or the board. The version she only let me see when things went wrong. Still, I hesitated. It took 3 more knocks before I got up, pulled on a shirt, and opened the door. She looked nothing like the woman from the gala. No makeup. Hair tied back. Pale. Wrinkled shirt like she hadn't changed since the night before. Hi, she said, voice soft. She tried to smile, but it collapsed halfway. I stepped aside. She entered the room quietly, eyes scanning the small space. 1 bed, 1 chair, a half-open suitcase on the floor. No extravagance, no luxury, just me, as I've always been. I've been trying to call, she said, wringing her hands. I saw. Silence stretched between us. She sat on the edge of the bed. I stayed by the window. You didn't have to cancel everything, she said finally. It felt vindictive. I turned to her, calm. Was it vindictive to leave me off the guest list? To stand there while they called me a beggar? She looked down. That wasn't supposed to happen. The list was curated. For image. For your image, I corrected. She didn't argue. I'm not trying to fight, she said, voice cracking a little. I didn't expect you to go this far. This far, I echoed. You mean finally drawing a line? Is that what this is? She whispered. Drawing a line? Or erasing me? I sat in the chair across from her. No, Isla. I'm erasing myself. From a version of this marriage where I only existed when you needed a transaction. Where my love was measured in wire transfers and logistical favors. Where you celebrated with people who didn't even know my name. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten. I nodded. Exactly. You didn't realize. She went quiet again, chewing on her lower lip. The truth is, she said slowly, I didn't want the world to see how much I still leaned on you. I wanted to look independent, strong, self-made. You could have been all those things, I said, without cutting me out. I know, she admitted, tears now gathering. I thought I was proving something. You were, I said, but not what you think. She looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time in years, I saw regret in her eyes that felt real. Not performative, not dramatic, just real. I miss you, she said. No, I replied gently. You miss what I did for you. She flinched, like the words hit harder than she expected. That's not fair. It's honest. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Opened something, then handed it to me. A list of paused projects. Declined payments. A note from one of her investors demanding clarity before next week's pitch. They're all freaking out, she whispered. I'm not your fixer anymore. She nodded, eyes brimming. So what happens now? I stood up, walked to the desk, took out a printed copy of the spreadsheet I prepared, the one I hadn't shown her yet. Every expense I'd covered, every act of silent support, labeled, dated, totaled. I handed it to her. She didn't speak as she read. Her eyes widened. Her mouth trembled. You kept track of all this? No, I said. I kept track of me, because no one else was. Her tears finally fell, and I didn't comfort her. Not out of cruelty, but because I was finally learning what it felt like to let someone else sit with the consequences of their choices. I need to think, she whispered. I've already started. I didn't expect her to come back. Not so soon, anyway. The last time we spoke, if you could call it that, it ended with her holding the printed spreadsheet in her hands, silently crying while I sat by the window, arms crossed, not moving to console her. It wasn't out of coldness. I just didn't have anything left to give. That morning, I had planned to go on a long walk, maybe stop at the small cafe near the water and clear my head. I hadn't been sleeping much. Even though I wasn't at home anymore, her presence still followed me. Memories in my luggage, her voice in the back of my mind, guilt curled around my shoulders like a scarf I couldn't take off. But then the knock came. Soft, tentative. I knew before I opened the door who it was. She was dressed differently this time. No heels, no statement outfit. Just Isla, jeans, sneakers, and a sweatshirt that I vaguely remembered buying her one winter. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, no makeup on, and her eyes were red around the edges like she hadn't slept either. Hi, she said. I know I shouldn't be here. I didn't know where else to go. I said nothing, just stepped aside and let her in. She stood awkwardly for a moment by the small table, glancing around the modest hotel room like she'd never seen me live so simply. And maybe she hadn't. Our home had always been modern, curated, sharp. This room had none of that. Just a lamp with a loose bulb and a carpet that probably hadn't been replaced in 5 years. But it was peaceful, and it was mine. For now. I thought you might still be mad, she said softly. I poured her a glass of water and handed it over. I'm not mad, I replied. I'm just done pretending. She flinched slightly at that. Sat down, cradling the glass like it gave her something to hold on to. I don't know how to say this without sounding selfish, she began. But I didn't realize how much I took you for granted until you were gone. I stayed quiet. She sighed. Everything's unraveling. Aspen, Bali, the board's losing confidence. I had to call off the lounge renovation. Jared keeps trying to spin things, but it's not working. I didn't make those decisions lightly, I said. I made them because I was tired of holding up a world that didn't leave room for me. Her voice cracked. I know. I tried to warn you, I added. I tried to bring it up so many times. Every time you brushed it aside. Like my support was some unspoken obligation. I know, she said again, quieter. And I was wrong. There was something heavy in her voice now. No sharp edges, no deflection. Just raw truth. It didn't make the hurt go away, but it gave it a place to settle. I thought I was building something for us, she whispered. But I was really building something with you holding all the bricks, and I never once asked if your hands were bleeding. That image stopped me for a moment. I sat across from her, folding my arms slowly. They were. But I kept going, because I believed in what you were doing. I know, she said, eyes brimming again. I know you did. And I twisted that belief into expectation. That you'd always be there. That I could just keep pulling. She wiped her face with her sleeve. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know that I see it now. Everything. What I did. What I failed to do. I let her words hang in the room, and I realized I had a choice. Not the choice to take her back, not yet. Maybe not ever, but the choice to speak, not as her partner, not as her provider, but as myself. Fully honestly, you didn't just leave me off a guest list, I said. You left me out of the story, out of your narrative. You turned us into a performance, and backstage, I was folding props while you took every bow. She looked up at me, guilt thick in her eyes. I stood in that ballroom, I continued, not because I needed the spotlight, but because I needed to remember who I was to you. And when I saw your face, when you looked at me like I was an interruption, I knew. She lowered her gaze. I didn't mean to treat you that way. But you did, I replied. And the truth is, if I hadn't pulled the funding, if I hadn't made it inconvenient, you wouldn't be sitting here. She didn't argue. And that, at least, was honest. I came because I wanted to say something to your face, she said after a moment. I'm sorry. For every time I made you feel invisible. For every moment I made you feel like an employee in your own marriage. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. But still, I stayed still. Sorry, I said slowly, doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't put me back at the table. I know, she said, but maybe it opens the door. She stood then, slowly, and reached into her pocket. She pulled out the Mont Blanc box I'd left on her pillow. She didn't open it, just held it out. I didn't accept this gift the way I should have, she said. Because I didn't see what it really was. It wasn't just a watch. It was every year, every hour, every sacrifice. And I ignored it. I let others call you names in front of me. I let you stand outside the world you helped build. She placed the box on the nightstand and stepped back. I'm not asking for another chance right now, she said. But I hope, maybe, one day we can look at each other and not feel resentment. I stood too, met her eyes. That depends on what you build from here. And whether you remember who helped lay the foundation. She nodded. And for once, she didn't try to spin it, or soften it, or walk around it. She simply said, thank you, Reed, for everything, even what I didn't deserve. Then she walked to the door. But before she left, she turned around. I'll make it right, she said. And then she was gone. I stood in that hotel room, silent, for a long time after. The Mont Blanc sat beside me, unopened. The city hummed outside. But inside, something had finally shifted. Not everything was fixed, but the truth had finally been spoken. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. 2 days passed after Isla left the hotel room. She hadn't called again. No texts. No emails. Nothing from Jared either, which was a surprise considering how loud he'd been before. But silence has a strange way of revealing who's truly invested and who's just panicking. In their case, it was obvious. The only reason they called was because the money stopped. Not because they missed me, but because the machine I'd been oiling had started squeaking. And I didn't miss the machine. But I did find myself thinking about her, about everything we built, and how we never really sat down to balance the emotional books. So that morning, I opened the original spreadsheet, the one I had built over months, years even, to track every dollar I'd contributed to Isla's success. At first, it was just about keeping records. But now, it felt different. Now it felt like something more, like proof. Not for her. For me. I added a final tab to the bottom, emotional cost. Not literal numbers, just a space to write what each expense actually represented. I wrote things like, February 2017, $2,500 for rebranding, sleepless nights, canceled plans, skipped anniversary dinner. July 2018, for $1,000 client acquisition trip to Montreal, missing my cousin's wedding. November 2019, $3,200 for the company's team-building retreat, swallowing resentment when I wasn't invited. Line after line, I mapped out the difference between support and sacrifice. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the invisibility, the erasure. I closed the laptop. Then, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed, not with a call from Isla, but with a news alert. Argento and Gray hit with sudden staff resignation, citing lack of transparency in leadership. My brow furrowed. I clicked through. Corbin, her lead designer, had resigned, and in his statement, he said, leadership without loyalty fails. We didn't know where the heart of the company was anymore. I stared at that sentence for a long time. I didn't reach out. I just read. And I listened to the silence that followed. Because for once, it wasn't mine to fill. But by afternoon, the storm found me anyway. I had just stepped out for coffee, my first real outing in days, when I saw her again. Not Isla. Marcy. Her assistant. She was standing outside the cafe like she'd been waiting for me. Dressed plainly, hair tied back, nervous eyes flicking around like she wasn't sure if I'd run or scream. "Reed," she said, walking up fast. "I swear, I'm not here to start anything. I need to talk to someone who understands what's going on." I didn't answer right away. "I quit," she said, breathless. "This morning." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect that." "Neither did I," she admitted. "But things are imploding over there. Investors are backing out. The holiday campaign launch got shelved. Corbin leaving was a blow, but it's more than that. It's like..." Isla cracked. I didn't say anything. I sipped my coffee and let her keep talking. "She came into the office yesterday," Marcy went on, "and she wasn't yelling or blaming anyone like I expected. She just sat at her desk and stared at that framed photo of the team from 3 years ago. You were in it, you know? The retreat in Sonoma. I remember that retreat. I'd paid for the house and cooked meals for everyone. They thanked me like I was the caterer. She kept saying, I let him become invisible." Marcy's voice softened. "I don't think she's okay. I let that sit for a while. And then, for the first time, I felt something that surprised me. Not satisfaction. Not justice. But sadness. Because for all the damage, all the cold moments and cut corners, part of me still remembered the version of Isla who used to cry from joy over small victories. The version who used to grab my hand under restaurant tables just to feel grounded. That woman had disappeared somewhere along the line. Swallowed by success, maybe. Or by the constant pressure to be more. And maybe I had disappeared too. In a different way. Letting myself become essential but invisible. Needed but never acknowledged. Marcy pulled a folded paper from her purse. "She asked me to give this to you. Said she didn't trust herself to say it right." I took the note. Not quickly. Not out of eagerness. But because I knew she wouldn't have written unless she meant it. After Marcy left, I sat on a bench, unwrapped the fold carefully, and began to read. "Reed, I didn't know how to talk to you anymore without sounding like I wanted something. And maybe that's the problem. I always assumed you'd give without asking, love without limits, serve without condition. I never stopped needing you. But I stopped showing you. And that's my failure. You were the one thing in my life I never questioned. I trusted you so deeply, I forgot to protect that trust. I built a world and locked you out of it, thinking I was proving my independence. But all I really proved was that I'd lost sight of the man who built the first bricks with me. I don't expect you to come back. I don't even know if I deserve to ask that. But I hope you find peace. Even if it's without me." Isla, I read it twice. Then a third time. It wasn't perfect. It didn't fix anything. But it was real. That night, I didn't go back to the hotel. I didn't go to our old place either. I booked a new room. Somewhere further from the city, near the water, with no memory carved into its walls. And I sat at the edge of the dock, letter folded beside me, the Mont Blanc watch ticking steadily in my hand. I looked out at the horizon and realized that maybe this wasn't the ending. But it was a reckoning. And in some strange, quiet way, it was enough for now. The downfall didn't come as a storm. It came like a quiet shift in the air. Small things unraveling at the edges until there was no way to deny that the structure was failing. I didn't go back to the office. I didn't reply to Isla's letter, at least not right away. But I watched. And I listened. By the end of the week, it was in the news again. Argento and Gray postpones Q3 launch due to internal restructuring, they said, as though that word could hide the truth. But those who were close enough knew exactly what was happening. The people she depended on were gone, the investors uneasy, the once airtight confidence of the company now leaking through every open crack. Jared had gone radio silent. No surprise there. His loyalty was tied to outcomes, not people. Meanwhile, Isla, well, she was quiet too. Not her usual curated quiet, the kind that came with polished press releases and elegant photo shoots, but a real, raw silence. I didn't hear from her, but I heard about her. From Marcy. From one of her board advisors. Even from Corbin, who sent me a brief message on LinkedIn saying, "Should have seen it sooner. She was walking on your shoulders the whole time." That line stayed with me for days. Still, I didn't interfere. I wasn't out for revenge. I wasn't sitting somewhere plotting how to make her suffer. I had simply stopped holding up the weight of someone else's empire. And in my absence, the air had changed. A week later, I was walking through a small artisan market on the east side of town, picking up a few things for my new place, candles, loose-leaf tea, a handmade leather wallet, when I noticed a young woman standing at a pop-up booth. She was animated, engaged, showing a product demo to a group of curious onlookers. I wouldn't have stopped, except something about the logo on her banner caught my eye. I walked closer. Deceiver, natural home diffusers. Crafted by nature, engineered for peace, and then I recognized her. Zadie. She was the startup founder Isla had laughed about once at a dinner party, dismissing her as too grassroots to scale. I remember Isla saying, "She's got spirit, but not much structure." Now, here she was, booth full, customers leaning in, energy humming like electricity around her. She looked up and noticed me. "Reed Callahan?" she asked. I nodded, half smiling. "That's me." She walked over. "I didn't think you'd actually follow up after that email." I said I would. I meant it. A few days earlier, I had taken a portion of the refunded Bora Bora money, the trip Isla never got to take, and invested it into Zadie's project. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to help her secure her first warehouse space. I hadn't done it for any public reason. I did it because, unlike Isla's crowd, Zadie looked like someone who still knew how to say thank you. She grinned and held out her hand. "You believed in me before the numbers looked pretty. That means a lot." I shook it. "You earned it." We talked for 10 minutes about the business, her next steps, the grant application I offered to co-write with her. She didn't fawn, didn't flatter. She simply thanked me, again and again, with sincerity that couldn't be faked. And as I walked away, I realized something. I wasn't just finding peace away from Isla. I was finding purpose. Later that evening, as I sat in my small living room with one of Zadie's diffusers running, my phone buzzed again. Another article. Another fallout. Investor withdraws from Argento and Gray, citing internal discord and transparency issues. I exhaled deeply. Not out of joy. Not even out of vindication. But out of closure. That was the word that kept circling my head these days. Closure. Not revenge. Not punishment. Just the slow, deliberate process of separating what once was from what should never be again. And then, without warning, I got a message from Isla. Just a photo. No caption. No emoji. Just a single photo of the Mont Blanc watch I gave her, resting on her now empty desk. I stared at it for a moment. The desk used to be cluttered with client files, PR plans, branding decks. Now, only the watch remained. It didn't feel like a guilt trip. It felt like a symbol. Maybe even a surrender. Still, I didn't reply. Instead, I sat back and looked around my new space. No marble floors. No curated art on the walls. Just warmth. Honesty. The scent of cedarwood from the diffuser swirling in the air. And in that quiet moment, I realized I hadn't just withdrawn my money from her world. I had reclaimed my presence from a place where it was never properly held. And finally, I could breathe again. It had been almost 3 weeks since I saw Isla. 3 weeks since I pulled the financial cord that quietly powered her world. 3 weeks since she sat in my hotel room and cried for the empire she built, for the man she forgot, for the truth that finally surfaced. And in those 3 weeks, I didn't once reach out. I didn't need to. Some wounds don't heal because someone comes back. Some wounds heal because you stop reopening them for someone who never brought you peace in the first place. But I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. The anger had burned off. What remained was something colder, clearer, a sort of stillness I hadn't felt in years. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, quiet street, wood floors, nothing too flashy. Just enough. And I started doing something I hadn't done in a long time. Living. On my own terms. One morning, I got an email from Zadie. The subject line read, "You might want to watch this." Inside was a video clip, less than a minute long. From a local entrepreneurship panel hosted at the City Hall. Zadie had been invited to speak about grassroots funding and community-based investment. In the clip, she stood in front of a modest audience, confidently addressing the room with the kind of energy that Isla used to have before she traded gratitude for grandeur. And then Zadie said something that made me freeze. There was one person, just one, who believed in me when I was just selling prototypes in mason jars at street fairs. He didn't ask for shares or branding rights. He didn't demand a spotlight. He just said, "Let me help you grow." That kind of support doesn't just fund your business. It reminds you who you are. The room applauded. My chest tightened, not with pride exactly, but with something more tender. Something like being remembered. For once, I hadn't been the invisible partner. I'd been the difference maker. Not behind the curtain, not erased from the photo. Present. Visible. I shut my laptop and leaned back in the chair, letting that small moment settle inside me. And it was right then that my phone lit up with a text from Isla. Isele, are you free to meet this evening? I stared at the screen. It wasn't dramatic. No please. No guilt-laced paragraphs. Just a question. I waited 5 minutes. Then I typed back. Where? We met at a small restaurant in the arts district. Not the kind of place she used to favor. No reservations, no valet, no curated plating. Just warm lighting, soft music, and wood tables with small candles. I arrived first. She came 10 minutes later, dressed in muted colors, no makeup, hair down and loose. She looked tired. Not worn down, but like someone who'd finally stopped running. Thank you for coming, she said as she sat down. I was curious, I replied. The waiter brought water. Neither of us looked at the menu. She folded her hands and stared at them for a long moment. I'm not sure how to start. Just start, I said. She exhaled. The company is smaller now. We've cut staff. Returned investor funds. Jared left, resigned 2 weeks ago. And I didn't stop him. I didn't react. I just listened. I've spent a lot of time sitting with the damage. Not just the business fallout, but what I did to you. How blind I let myself become. She paused, blinking back the shine in her eyes. I used to be so afraid of not being taken seriously, she continued. Being a woman in this field, being underestimated, dismissed. It felt like I had to always be loud, always polished, always in control. And I thought needing you made me look weak. So I hid you. That was your choice, I said quietly. But it wasn't just hiding me. It was erasing me. And not just from the company, from your life. She nodded. I know. And I'm sorry. I know sorry can't undo what I did. But I wanted to say it again. This time, without excuses. The table fell quiet for a few seconds. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a document. She slid it across to me. I opened it. Legal paperwork. Transfer of business shares. A formal record of repayment for all funds I had contributed over the last 7 years. I had the board review everything, she said. I added 10% on top, interest for time. You never asked for equity, but I'm giving it anyway. You earned more than this. But this is what I can start with. I looked at the document for a long moment. I wasn't sure what to say. This isn't about fixing things between us, she added. I don't expect you to come back. I don't even know if I deserve that. This is just me, taking responsibility. And then, she said something that caught me completely off guard. I want you to know that I'm stepping down. My eyes lifted. From Argento and Gray. She nodded. Effective next quarter. I realized I don't know who I am anymore. I've been leading on a hollow platform for too long. I'm taking a sabbatical. No press release. Just quietly stepping back. That silenced me. Because in all my imaginings of what she might do next, that was never one of them. I thought stepping away would be defeat, she said. But I think it might be the first real choice I've made in years. The waiter came. We ordered 2 teas. For the rest of the hour, we didn't talk about the past. We talked about books, travel, how the sky seemed brighter lately. Simple things. Real things. And before she left, Isla stood at the table and said, I hope you find happiness, Reed. Whether that path leads back to me or far away from me. I hope you feel free. I nodded slowly. And for the first time in a long time, I actually did. Free. That night, I didn't go home with answers. But I walked away with peace. And sometimes, that's more than enough. 2 months later, I stood on the platform at Kyoto Station, backpack over my shoulder, passport tucked neatly in the chest pocket of my jacket. It was early, just past 7 a.m., and the mist still clung to the rooftops like it was unsure whether to lift or stay. I breathed in the air, crisp and clean, tinged with the scent of cedar and distant street food warming up for the day. I hadn't planned this trip months in advance. It wasn't some bucket list destination I'd dreamed of since childhood. No, this trip was impulse. It was instinct. It was the exact opposite of everything my life had been for the last 7 years. And it felt right. I boarded the train without ceremony. No fanfare. No Instagram post. No matching suitcases or synchronized itineraries. Just me. And that, for once, was more than enough. As the train glided along the tracks, the city slowly gave way to small towns and countryside. Fields blurred by. Hills rose like old friends waiting quietly. I leaned my head against the glass, closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to check emails, reply to anyone, or anticipate someone else's needs. I was just still, and that stillness was sacred. I thought about Isla, but not in the way I used to. She had sent one more message a few weeks ago. No questions, no requests, just a photo of her on a hiking trail somewhere in Oregon, standing next to a tree she'd captioned, "Learning how to slow down. One step at a time." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. There are some journeys we must take separately, even if we once walked side by side. She was on hers. I was on mine. And that was okay. After arriving at my guest house, I spent the next few days doing something I hadn't done in years, choosing myself. I woke up without an alarm. I ate slowly, sometimes even skipping meals just because I wanted to wander instead. I visited shrines with no tour guides. I walked for hours with no destination. One morning, I sat beside a koi pond for nearly an hour, just watching the fish move. No meetings, no planning, no background noise except birdsong and wind. And the more time passed, the more I realized something. Healing doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or revelations. Sometimes it's quiet, like waking up and realizing your chest doesn't ache anymore, or walking past a couple on the street and not comparing their smiles to what you lost. It's sitting with yourself and not needing to explain why you left, or why you stayed too long. That's what closure looks like. Not a door slamming, but a door gently closing behind you, while you walk forward, not looking back. One evening, while walking through the historic district, I passed a small shop that sold handmade timepieces. Not luxury watches, not flashy status symbols, just wood, leather, and care. I stepped inside and struck up a conversation with the owner. A gray-haired man with soft eyes and hands that moved like he'd been building time instead of keeping it. He showed me a small piece, maplewood face, navy blue band, hand-carved with the words Ichigo, Ichi on the back. One moment, one meeting, he explained. It means every moment is once in a lifetime. Every person, every chance, never repeats. I bought it, not to replace the Mont Blanc I gave Isla, but to mark the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen, and chose myself instead. That night, I stood on a small bridge, the city lights reflected in the river below. Lanterns floated along the banks. Children laughed in the distance. I checked the time, not out of obligation, but because I could. The watch read 9 p.m., and for the first time in a long, long time, it didn't feel like I was running out of time. It felt like time had finally caught up with me and said, "You're right on schedule." I turned off my phone. No buzzes, no pings, no sudden knocks on hotel doors or emergency calls asking me to fix something I didn't break. Just silence and peace. And then I smiled, because I finally understood what all those missed calls, all those panicked emails, all those desperate messages were really about. They weren't about me. They were about losing the version of me that made everything easier for them. The silent builder, the giver, the man who never said no. But I wasn't that man anymore. And the best part? I didn't have to prove it to anyone. Not with cold revenge, not with court documents, not with rage, just with absence. Because sometimes, disappearing is the loudest thing you can do. I spent the rest of the week exploring Kyoto like a man discovering life again. I journaled. I took pictures no one else would ever see. I smiled at strangers. I even helped a lost tourist find her train. And as I packed my things on the final day, I looked around at the small room. The folded linens, the single chair by the window, the bamboo mat in the corner, and I whispered a quiet thank you. To the stillness, to the silence, to the version of me that walked away without slamming the door. As I rolled my suitcase down the narrow street toward the station, I passed a small cafe. The kind Isla would have hated. No menu in English. No Wi-Fi. No brand presence.